Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Kushina gives his infinite chain to Naruto during the Kyuubi sealing part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Hokage Monument. Dusk, 8 p.m. A young boy was sitting on a spike of the Yondame's stone hair. If one were to see the boy's gaze, they would think that he was staring at the horizon, thinking some deep thoughts, and, in a way, they would be right. But the thing they would most likely notice would be his appearance. He had a black shirt that covered his chest and upper arms. Over the shirt he had a dark red vest, left open, with 2 pockets on each side, and an orange fox curled on itself on the back. His pants were a dark blue, with a pouch on each tight. Tattoos covered his hands and forearms, along with his stomach, his face a bit feral, which, combined with the 3 whisker-like marks on his cheeks, made him look like a fox. His hair, however, was his most noteworthy, being a vibrant yellow at the roots and a deep red at the tips. The colors made an orange fringe right where they touched. The boy was named Uzumaki Naruto, and he was meditating under the morning sun, trying to improve the control he had over the energies raging inside him, but he couldn't concentrate on his life force, for on but 1 hour, he would be assigned to a team, he would be assigned to a formal teacher, rather than his mother, sealed inside him. He was nervous. It was the first day in 4 years that he would show his true self. Checking his watch, the young Uzumaki threw himself from the spike he was on to the small lake behind the Hokage Tower. 20 minutes later, he was back at the top of the mountain, walking to the forest with Big Scroll. Konoha's Forest. Night, 10:30 p.m. Naruto was sitting on a forest clearing, hunched over the scroll, reading the jutsus that were on it. He was trying to find a way to break the seal on his stomach, but try as he might, the only thing he saw were either suicidal techniques, incredibly chakra-exhausting jutsus, or things that could kill you if done wrong. But the tattooed boy copied 3 clone techniques, 4 Futon Judas, 5 Suiton and his idol's Rasengan. He would have copied the Haranshin too, had it been on the scroll. Hours later, around midnight, the blonde red-haired boy was panting. He was sure that he would fall asleep as soon as he laid down on his bed, but in his mind, it was worth it. He had managed to learn one of the jutsus he copied from the scroll, the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, that let the user create solid but fragile copies of himself. Granted, it wouldn't be of much use in battle, but if what he had read was true, he could make his training go faster. Oh, he wouldn't abuse the shadow clones for the memory feedback. His healing was fast, but he doubted he could survive suddenly experiencing hundreds of things at the same time. But using up to 10 clones a time would definitely speed up the process. He was about to open the scroll again when he heard leaves rustling nearby. He gathered his remaining energy and stood still, tensed, waiting for anything. 30 seconds later, Yumi no Iruka appeared on the clearing and Naruto relax. I should have known you would find me, Iruka-nai. He said. Seriously, you steal the forbidden scroll of seals, and the only thing you say when you see me is that Iruka sighed. Whatever, come, I'll take to the Hokage Tower. As he was making his way to Naruto, a giant shuriken embedded itself on the ground between them. They turned their heads towards the source of the weapon. I knew it was a good idea following Iruka. After all, you are always the one that finds the demon after his pranks. A white-haired man was standing on a branch, arms crossed and an arrogant smirk on his face. Now Naruto, why don't you give me the scroll so I can give you your hit I8? Naruto, run, take the scroll and run. Iruka had all his attention on Mizuki, and he knew that he could only win if he fought all out and playing tricks. Now why would he do that? I'm pretty sure he would like to know about why the villagers hate him. That caught Naruto's attention. He would break that law. Oh, he does want to know, so I guess I will tell you. You see, remember the classes about the Kyuubi attack? Naruto was pretty sure he was going to insult his mother. That did not prepare him for what Iruka said. Naruto, don't listen to him, I know you, and whatever Mizuki is gonna say is a lie. That made Naruto really surprised, his eyes and mouth wide open. Iroha knew his secret. Then why hadn't he acted like the other villagers? Yes, he knew he was hated, and even then, the day he met the man, the only thing he saw in his eyes was mirth, like if he was only regarding any other orphan wanting to become a ninja. Oh, I wouldn't be so sure, after all. You see that he was interrupted by Iruka returning the shuriken back at Mizuki. He blocked it with a pair of kunai. When the weapon fell to the floor, he saw Iruka leaping at him, an angry expression on his face, kunai held in his hand on a reverse grip, ready to strike. Mizuki simply scoffed, guarded and blocked the strike, leaving him and Iruka on a stalemate, but eventually he managed to overpower the Chunin teacher, throwing him to the ground below. Iruka gasped, the air leaving his lungs, but managed to roll away and stand before a drop kick from his opponent was driven to the spot where he was but seconds ago. Iruka saw Mizuki move and raised his arms to block a kick to his chest before grabbing the leg and throwing Mizuki to a tree close by. Mizuki flipped mid-air, landing with his feet on the tree trunk. He bent his knees, using the momentum gained to launch himself at Iruka, fist raised, aiming to the centrum. The brown-haired man dodged to the right, managing to get out of the flying man's path. He turned around and threw a handful of shuriken at Mizui, who had just landed, and they connected. Only for the traitor to turn into the log and appear behind Iruka, driving a kunai into his back. The man gasped as the metal weapon pierced his flesh and turned around to try to give the white-haired man a punch in the head, but it was blocked and he is thrown to a tree, back first, to push the knife in deeper. Only to be grabbed by a black and red blur and left to lie down on the grass. Naruto had watched the fight in fascination, the attacks he could barely follow, the force he knew could knock him out. It was the first time he had seen a battle without it being controlled by instructors or not having to see the opponent hold back. He knew he could outwit both Chunin, but in a straight fight, he would be death. But when he saw his Ani-san get pierced and thrown, he didn't think, he just acted, grabbed him midair, and laid him face down on the ground. If you hurt him anymore, he growled, his head low and eyes covered by his spikes. I will return it. 100-fold. He raised his head, and Mizuki was surprised by the hatred on the boy's eyes, but he recovered and grinned. Yeah? And just how would you do that, brat? After all, you are but a roach against me. Naruto didn't rise to the taunt, instead, he moved his hands to the only seal of the jutsu he learned that night and said Taiju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. And Mizuki found himself surrounded by hundreds multicolored teens. The last thing he saw were the copies jumping onto him. Iruka could only look in awe at the horde of Narutos, impressed that an almost 13-year-old had that much chakra. No wonder he had a problem with the normal Bunshin he taught, and smiled as he looked at his surrogate Odo. Naruto chuckled sheepishly as he stared at Mizuki's bloodied form and scratched his head as he looked at his teacher. I think I overdid it. Tobeo Iruka could only chuckle before wincing and getting help from the younger kid to go to the Hokage's office, where the red-tipped boy would receive his forehead protector. Naruto's apartment. 1:30 a.m. Naruto was asleep on his feet, but even then, the smile was fixed on his face. He had done it, he managed to become a genin, even if it was with an unorthodox method. He walked from the door to his room, undressing as moved, trying to get to the bed before falling asleep. He put on his sleeping cap and with a yawn, he fell face first on the mattress. Mindscape. Naruto's mind had changed a lot since his childhood. At first it had been a boiler room with leaks, but after 8 years, it was no longer. Between his mother's affection, the people who liked him, and, to a lesser extent, the interactions with the Kurama, it became what most would call the most peaceful place they had ever seen. It was an open space, with trees strewn about, a lake was off to the side, flower beds were abundant, bathing the place with a floral smell, the moon was high in the sky, lighting the place with an ethereal glow. It was in the middle of his mind that a groggy Naruto found himself, wondering why had he gone there instead of the dreamland. He had wanted to visit the Sea of Ramen again. His lost visit had been interrupted by the damn alarm clock, especially since he was still tired from the last day. It was during his musings that he was tackled by a 9-tailed, dog-sized fox, who was grinning like a lunatic. This fox was dark orange, with shadows around his eyes that were a deep red, shining with mirth. Kurama get of, I wanna sleep Tobeo. Naruto grumbled, but Kurama's grin only got bigger. Nah, I'll stay here, the fox said in amusement. You are particularly comfortable today. Naruto only managed a tired glare. Now don't give me that look. We called you here for a reason. It was then that Naruto heard a laugh from his right. Kurama, let Naru-kun up, I want to talk with him. Uzumaki Kushina was a beautiful woman, with her fair skin, flaming red hair that matched her personality, slightly round face with noble features, amethyst eyes and hergless figure. Many would fight to be close to her. She was wearing a blue kimono with several spirals on it, a purple obi around her waist, and an amused smile on her face. Hi, Ka-chan, thank you. He was referring to the fact that he had had trouble breathing with Kurama on his chest. Naruto had met his mother and the Kyuubi when he was 5 years old. He had passed out from exhaustion after 3 days on the street with no place to sleep. Since then, most of his afternoons passed with him following his mother's regime or simply talking with them, either on his mindscape or loosing himself on the horizon. You're welcome, Sachi, but we do have to talk. Tebane. One of the things that ran on the family was the verbal tick. Now that you are a shinobi, we'll have to up your training, especially with your clones on it. You'll have to wait for his team to be assigned. Kurama interrupted. Your training will have to be scheduled to not interrupt his teachers, and I plan to train him too. The blonde-rooted boy was shocked. It would be the first time the fox stepped in on his training, and he was already thinking of all the things he would learn. He imagined himself spouting fox fire and fighting along a summon. But his fantasy was interrupted by a tail in the head, launching him away and making him face plant close to a tree. Damn it, you fox. Don't do that, you Agarita Zibaka. Unfortunately for Naruto, it was the tree his mother was leaning against. Don't curse in front of me, aho, and as such, he received a punch on the scalp, slamming him on the ground again. Of course, the teen didn't have the guts to point out the irony of the statement. As amusing it is to watch you two ninja, you should take the week off, boy. No heavy training, if anything just continue your morning routine, Kermit told him, and your study with your mother. I want out of here already, he mumbled the last part. Hi, can I sleep now? I'm tired and I want to visit Irukanai. Kushina smiled and sat with her back rested on the tree trunk and put her son's head on her lap, making him yawn and cuddle. Kurama saw this and shrank, so he could fit between the arms of the boy he was sealed inside. That night, both Fox and Kid fell asleep to a mother's lullaby. Meeting the honorable grandson. Naruto's apartment noon. Rise and shine you little bugger, the sun is high, the birds singing, and the dogs are humping. Naruto was startled awake by Kurama's shout, so startled in fact that he fell of the bed a tangled mess. Don't be so cruddy, heard a punch, you could have said that new lives are being created, Databane. Please don't shout so early in the morning, he grumbled and was answered in a booming laugh. Morning, says the little baka, look at the clock, Gaki, it's almost midday. Kyuubi was having a lot of fun that morning. He had made his prison hit his head and now he was causing migraine, all the while running from an angry mother he had woken up. He was looking forward to day. But what he had said shocked Naruto. He had slept in, he would be late to take his registration photo unless he didn't take a shower, and he couldn't eat his morning dose of ramen, meaning he would be cranky until the ramen had its daily sacrifice, and he would have to appease the log too, since as far as he knew, Mizuki wasn't a follower, and the traitor had used a kawarimi during his fight with Iruka. He knew his day would be, in the words of his Nara friend, troublesome. The boy dressed quickly, the place of his usual attire taken by a full shirt that had the blue Uzumaki swirl on the front. He had also put on his forehead protector as a collar and put goggles on his forehead before bolting out of the window and to the roofs, jumping streets and alleys in a desperate effort to get to the Hokage Tower before 12. During the way he found many shinobi patrolling the rooftops of Konoha. The poor bastards never stood a chance. Uzumaki Naruto tackled, pushed and shoved them out of his way. He even shocked a poor cat with a ribbon on its head, and the cat joined him in his run. He was running like the hounds of hell were after him, and he managed to get to his destination on time, despite the many angry chunin after him. Made it to Bayo. A panting stamina machine looked at the animal at his side and carefully removed the ribbon on its ear. After that, the cat took off again. He entered the tower, a destination clear in his head, the place that would mark him as a ninja, the place that would make him a kid with a clear path to take. Hokage's office 30 minutes later. An old man in his late 60s, dressed in red robes, sat behind a desk filled with papers, appraising the registration photo his surrogate grandson had gone with. He had expected something a bit more lively, if not eccentric. You know, I am surprised that you look serious on this, though I would have liked it more had you not brought your nightcap with you. Indeed, had it not been for that, the boy on the picture would have been the image of nobility. The black shirt he had on with his family's spiral-on front, combined with the steeled face and the ninja goggles, and the almost visible aura of regality, were all ruined by the cap on top of his head, a hat that took the form of a grinning fox. Moo, it's not my fault I overslept to Bayo. With what happened yesterday, I didn't get to sleep until 2. Gigi the orange-fringed boy was pouting. He wanted the photo to intimidate, not to make the female population scream kawaii. As his mother had when she saw the photo, or the male to laugh, as Kurama had done. Be it as it may, you can't take another photo since it already is afternoon. The old man was struggling to keep the grin of his face, out of sympathy to boy, but the pouting boy in front of him was just so amusing. Said boy could only groan in disappointment before grinning much like Kurama the night before. Guess I'll have to pull another prank, he thought, before saying fine, I'll be going now. Gigi, the log and the ramen demand my presence. Now Sarutobi was openly smiling, his eyes dancing with mirth, thinking about how the boy took after both his parents. Seriously, it's like his parents left him a handbook on ways of lie or something, if only he knew. So Gigi, you still haven't figured out the secret to paperwork? A pained face was his answer. Well, it's easy really, you just gotta use. He was interrupted by a boy who looked 3 years younger than Naruto bursting into the office shouting a battle cry before tripping with the scarf that was way too large on the frame of the boy and looking back at Hiruzen. It probably happened often. So he did the only thing someone on his position could have done, he snorted, as did his tenants. The boy groaned and sat up, rubbing the sore spot on his forehead. Someone must have placed traps, he muttered, before spotting the red blonde and glaring. Why the hell did you trip me? The brown-haired kid demanded. Seriously, echoed the voices in his head before he walked the fallen boy and picked him by his blue scarf. Don't blame people for your clumsiness, Dadabayo. Both men were now in a glaring contest. Another man had now busted into the office, wearing only blue, shades covering his eyes, his forehead protector sewn into a bandana, and while Naruto could feel glaring eyes, they did not feel as the usual ones he got from civilians. What are you doing, Gaki? Put Sandame Sama's grandson down, immediately. Ah, so that was why the brat was let in. And said boy was looking smug. Ha, you heard him, he said, I'm his, points at Sarutobi, grandson, you gotta put me down. Naruto looked at the man, then at the kid, and at the Hokage. Whatever, you're still a brat, he said, before throwing him at the couch. Right, so, I'm going now. Gigi, Meigo no Gaki, team. With that said, he jumped out the window. He was at least 3 blocks away when he heard a shout of, "He didn't tell me the secret." Konoha's Main Street 2 hours later. Naruto was annoyed. First, someone had repeatedly interrupted his daily prayers to the log by coming in and out of his detection range. Then he had the feeling of being talked about somewhere, and lastly, someone now taken a bad costume and trailed him where he went, and it was grating on his nerves. Right now he was headed for his favorite restaurant in order to offer a sacrifice to the Raymond, and he was about to make it there when he finally blew up. "Okay, why the hell are you following me, Dadabeo?" He shouted at a rock on the other side of the road. Everyone knows that rocks aren't square. As he had said, a bad costume. He stood there, glaring at the rock, waiting for something to happen, and just as he was turning around, the box exploded in colorful smokescreens, after which he heard coughs and groans. He was 70% sure that it was the same kid from the Hokage's office. "Heh, so you did see me, not that I expected any less," and there it was, the same loud voice. The blonde-rooted boy sighed and told the younger boy, "Listen kid, if you got anything to say, then wait till I have my ramen, if not, then get lost," and he said it again. Ichiraku's 10 minutes later. The Ichiraku ramen stand was a small building, only big enough to house about a dozen people. Apart from the chef and his daughter working in the kitchen, said people were some of the only civilians that saw Naruto as a person, and some may even think that Ichiraku AM, the owner's first and only daughter, had a crush on the red-tipped blonde. The owner, Ichiraku Tuchi, was a man in his mid to late 40s, with a heavy build. He wore a dirty apron over a white shirt, his hair was already starting to gray, but it was mostly covered by his hat. His daughter, Ichiraku AM, was 3 years older than Naruto. She kept in shape, so her body was lean, and her brown hair was covered by a white bandana, except for 3 bangs, 2 framing her face and 1 reaching her right brow. Right now, she was watching the 2 boys in front of her, amused by the shocked face the younger of the 2 was displaying, obviously having never seen someone eat as much or as fast as the spiky-haired boy was eating. After his 5th bowl, Naruto began to slow down his eating to that of a normal person, allowing the scarfed boy to get out of his stupor and to start his own bowl. "So, what's your name?" "I doubt you want me to call you Meigo no Gaki." The boy looked up from his ramen. "My name is Konohamaru," answered the boy. "I was named in honor of the village, so that I would always be known, but everyone sees me only as the honorable grandson, and never by me," the boy sniffed. "Who would have thought? His position is kinda like mine," thought the log practitioner, receiving an answer from his mother. "Yes, I remember Tsunade telling us that she was like that before making herself a name." Konohamaru continued to speak. "That's why I want to beat Jai-chan, so everybody knows who I am." A snort from Kurama drove his attention inwards again. "Sounds to me like a chance to corrupt the youth, make him your apprentice." Kushina tried to hit the fox, but it escaped before she could. "No, you can't have a student yet, Tebane." She opposed the idea, mainly because of the reaction it would bring. "Wait another couple of years. I could teach something like control. That would help him." "Okay kid, you got me." He scratched the back of his neck. "I will teach something." Konohamaru's eyes widened, and Naruto grew a smirk. "But you gotta be fast." Dadabeo Nato threw his wallet to Am, confident that she would take care of it, and took off running, leaving behind a gaping kid and an amused waitress. Training ground number 7. 2 hours later. Naruto was grinning, and grinning hard, for the best part of the last 2 hours. He had led Konohamaru in a merry chase throughout the village and the surrounding forests, and the kid had kept up with him. Granted, he had been weighted down, but still, it was impressive. "Well kid, you managed to impress me, so I will teach you something." He pointed to the tree. "Lay down with your feet on the trunk." Konohamaru looked confused, but did it nonetheless. "Now channel chakra to your feet to get them to stick to the trunk, but put too much and you will get blasted, so careful." Konohamaru immediately started, wanting to complete the exercise, while Naruto himself made a couple of shadow clone to practice a bit on both his Taijutsu and on his Kekkei Genkai. The Uzumaki clan was a strange one. Apart from the passive Kekkei Genkai that gave them a ready mind for seals and a large life force, once in a while, a kid would awaken on of the 3 active bloodlines. Said kids would often be apprenticed by an adult that had the same ability. The 3 bloodlines were this. Chikurichnik, that would allow a Uzumaki to either heal, poison or disrupt an enemy. It was basically what it said, by injecting the user's potent chakra, and depending on the intention, the target would either be healed of superficial injuries at the rate of a normal Uzumaki, or it would act as a poison and either disrupt the target's feel for his own chakra or killing them over time. Most of the holders of the ability either specialized in support or in taijutsu. Then there was the Ite no Kanjiki, the rarest of the 3. By pushing the user's chakra into any ninjutsu, the Uzumaki with this bloodline could redirect or cancel a jutsu. This is mainly because the dense chakra could neutralize the original one present in the technique. All holders were incredibly good ninjutsu users. And lastly was the Kage no Byuki. It gave the Uzumaki with it the ability to create weapons out of chakra, and they would be golden in color, hence the name. Weapons created by this are incredibly hard to break and could be used as a focus, making them good for armed ninjutsu, but the user could only create one kind of weaponry, so the tool was materialized for the first time, and then the Uzumaki had to study on its use before being capable of effectively using the bloodline. An example of this would be Uzumaki Kushina, capable of using chakra chains. Naruto himself had the Kage no Buki and could create a set of claws that would stick to his hands and feet. Think of the falcon talons of Ninja Gaiden 2. This made study Taijutsu styles that could be modified to allow their use in battle. In the end he ended up with a style that would mix kicks, punches, thrust and swipes, and tweak the stances a bit. Hence the clones working on both at the same time while he watched Konohamaru. Meanwhile, Ibizu was not having a good day. He had lost his charge not only once, but twice in the same day. The first time he had attacked his grandfather and got himself hurt by the Kyuubi container. He was no fool however, and the only reason he disliked the kid was because of his pranks, but he was sure that the brat had wanted to do more to the honorable grandson, and he, the elite jounin he was, wouldn't allow it. So when his charge disappeared for the second time in the same day, he knew he had to act, and as such, he tracked the kid and his pupil. When he found them he saw his young pupil lying down with his feet to a tree, a frustrated expression on his face, and some ways away, he saw the Jinchuriki looking amused, while 6 clones were sparring with another, with golden claws. He was about to burst into the clearing when he saw Sandaime Sama's grandson start taking steps up the tree trunk. He absently noted that the redhead's expression changed to impressed. Right then he decided to walk into the training ground, rather than bursting into it. When he entered the clearing, he spoke, "I admit, if you managed to get him to do the tree walking exercise, I may have underestimated you. Konohamaru lost concentration and slipped from the branch he was hanging." Well, Naruto only looked at him, an inquisitive expression present. "I have tried to get him to grasp the basics for some time now." Naruto nodded. "Well, I suppose you want him back." Ibizu gave an affirmative sound. "I'm leaving then." Kono the boy looked at him. "Keep practicing until it's second nature." He started walking away. "And don't doubt to look for me." Dadabayo with it he stepped out of the clearing, leaving the jounin to ponder. "Wait, Ani-san." Konohamaru shouted, "Thank you for helping me, but from now on, we are rival, and I will be better than you." Naruto smiled slightly. In the end, it had not been a bad day. He had impressed a jounin and gained a follower. Hopefully the rest of the week would be as good. Naruto's apartment, 8:30 am. The week had passed since the day Mizuki had turned traitor. It was the talk of the village. Most people knew the official story, that he had tried to steal the sacred scroll of seals, and only 4 people knew the true story, one of them in prison. During the week Naruto was constantly working to improve his seals, apart from trying to master his Kogen no Buki. Right now, it took him a full minute to materialize his claws, and the only seals he could do effectively were only useful for training and storage. He only knew how to do the explosive tag because it was cheaper making them than buying. The day would be his last peaceful day, the last day of his life as a civilian. Today he would be assigned to the people who would become his team, his nakama. He could only hope that they wouldn't be demon haters. The young Jinchuriki woke up at 8:30, took a shower and gave the ramen its morning sacrifice, before grabbing his goggles and hit I-8, putting the former on his forehead and tying the latter on his neck, filled his shuriken and kunai holsters, before sealing the rest on the storage seals on his forearms and wrists, and proceeded to do his usual exercise routine before heading out to the academy. Shinobi Academy, 9:30 am. The classroom was bustling with voices. Kids 12 and 13 were talking among themselves, excited about finally becoming genin, trying to predict what the future would bring to them. When young Naruto entered the class, the kids glanced at him before returning to their conversations, but he paid them no mind and took a seat near the only 4 kids he could call friends. These 4 kids were the heirs to their clans, Aburame Shino, Nara Shikamaru, Akimichi Choji and Hyuga Hinata, and none of them had been corrupted by the older generations because their families understood who he was and not what he held. Shino was a tall boy with bushy brown hair, a tan jacket with a large collar that covered the lower part of his face and sunglasses over his eyes. He, like the rest of his clan, used Kakechu bugs for tracking and his techniques. His friendship with Naruto had started when the red-tipped boy asked him about his bugs, and Shino was skeptical at first, but explained about his destruction bugs, and by the end of his explanation, he and Naruto were collecting all kinds of insects around the academy playground. Shikamaru was about his height, with a mesh shirt into a tan vest with green linings, black hair put on a pineapple-like style. Like the rest male Naras, Shikamaru was chronically lazy, often falling asleep as soon his head touched anything to help support it, but his highly analytical mind more than made up for his laziness. Their relationship started when Naruto asked to play shogi, a strategy game, Shikamaru explained, and Naruto wanted to play. The Nara would later admit that his completely random moves had him thinking, and sometimes he lost to the boy's unpredictability. Choji was a large boy with an average stature. His brown hair was only visible from the 2 spiky patches coming out from his bandana. On his cheeks he had spirals, and his shirt had the kanji for food. He was constantly eating, but he also trained his muscles, needing the strength for his clan's expansion technique. He had met Naruto after being introduced by Shikamaru. He had been shy during the first meeting since he was out of his comfort zone, but when Naruto defended him from some bullies, he opened up. By the time the fourth meeting came around, the two were on chip-sharing terms. Hyuga Hinata had short dark blue hair, wore a baggy beige hoodie jacket with her clan symbol. Hinata was a weird one, she was shy and would often retreat into her clothes, and while she hated hurting others, she wouldn't hesitate to injure if threatened. She had met Naruto when he saved her from some bullies that were humiliating her when they were 6 years old. Since then she had a crush on the boy and would often blush when around him. He had helped her with training, and because of it, he had modified the Jaiken to be more flexible. They talked their time away, with Naruto and Shikamaru having a quick game of shogi and eating from the extra-large bag of potato chips Choji had brought. It was about 10 a.m. when Iruka entered the classroom, and while he expected the conversations, he did not welcome them, so he did his signature henge, the Akuma no Atama, "Okay brats, shut up and pay attention." He withheld a smile when everyone turned to him. "Today you shall receive your team, and they will become something important to you over time." He looked at every kid in the eye and continued, "They will be your comrades until you make Chunin. They will have your back, and your sensei will help you become the best you can." He grabbed the name list from the desk. "Your teams will be the following. Team 1. All the members from Team 1 to 6 were civilian, so they were inconsequential. Team 7, Uchiha Sasuke, Haruno Sakura, a declaration of love ensued, and Inuzuka Kiba under Hada Kakashi. Team 8 are Uzumaki Naruto, Hyuga Hinata and Aburame Shino under Yuuhi Kurenai, and since Team 9 is still in circulation, Akamichi Choji and Yumanka Ino under Sarutobi Azuma. That is all, come back in 1 hour to meet your senseis." A man on his 30s entered the room. The man had a lit cigar hanging from his lips, a bandana on his arm, and the official Jounin outfit. "Alright Team 10, with me, we're getting to know each other over lunch." With that said he left the room, Shikamaru, Ino and Choji following. Iruka only sighed before dismissing the teams. His only thought was on how the other teachers had at least a crash from the window, followed by a poofing sound, made him want to weep. Hour and a half later, Yuuhi Kurenai was a beautiful woman, and she knew it. Her skin was without imperfections, her hair was as dark as a raven and made in messy waves, her eyes were a deep ruby red, and her figure was stunning. Her dress consisted of a wrap-like dress, with a red sleeve on her right side. She often called herself the sexy older sister kind of woman, but on the field, she was severe, a leader through and through. Right now she was sitting near a stream on a park, staring at her team, trying to gauge the skills of the two boys, since she had helped train the girl, and felt herself frown at the hyperactive behavior of the boy who looked as if he had dyed his hair. She had met only one person with that attribute, and it would be scary if the two ever met. She smiled at the kids before her and started speaking. "Hello, we'll start with introductions, and since I'm sure you know each other I'll start. My name is Yuuhi Kurenai, I like vodka, wine and salty taiko. I dislike perverts and cake. My hobbies are spending time with my friends and creating genjutsu, and my dream is to have a family." She pointed to Hinata. "No, I'm Hi Hinata. I like C cinnamon rolls and G gardening. I dislike arrogance and F fighting. My hobby is P pressing F flowers, and my dream is to become a clan head." Kurenai nodded. She had expected that, but her confidence needed work. She pointed at Shino. "My name is Aburame Shino. I like my friends and logic. I dislike arguments, arrogance and speaking more than necessary. My hobbies are finding new kinds of bugs, and my dream is to become a good leader for my clan." The red-eyed beauty nodded at Naruto. Hopefully her assessment would be wrong. "Name's Uzumaki Naruto Dadabayo. I like the ramen, the log, my friends and the Ichiraku. I hate arrogance, opinions with no proof, and those who disrespect me. My hobbies are training and tasting and comparing different kinds of ramen, and my dream is to become Hokage." And there went that hope. She sighed before looking at her genin. "Well, now that that's out of the way, I have to explain something to you. Tomorrow there will be another exam." She chuckled at the expression on Naruto's face. "You see, the test you did was to weed out hopeless cases, so tomorrow, meet me at training ground 8 at noon." Jana she left the stream and went to the village, intent on having a cup of wine. Training ground 8:11 am. Naruto, Hinata and Shino were sitting on the shade of a tree, discussing their upcoming exam. What do why you think she'll have us do?" The shy girl asked the boys on her sides. "Logic states that it will be a tracking exercise," the ever-stoic boy answered, and Naruto found himself nodding. "Yep, with your eyes, Shino's Kakeichiku and my shadow clones, we make a good tracking team." He paused a bit. "That are assassination and clearing." He was of course talking of bandit camps that were scattered all across the elemental nations. "Quite right you are." Naruto Kurenai's voice reached them. "This unit was put together with tracking in mind, and to pass this test, you will have to find this." From her sleeve, she took out a brown box. It was really small, barely bigger than her fist, and looked really fragile. "You have to find it before lunchtime, or you will fail. Any questions?" At their negative, she nodded and told them, "As soon as the alarm sounds your test starts." And with that she disappeared. 10 minutes later, the bell rang. "We should prepare a plan of action," Shino stated. In his monotonous voice, Naruto grinned. That was his forte. What with his pranks, he was as good a planner as Shikamaru. "Right then, here's the plan." Hinata the girl looked up. "You are going in the middle of the group. Use your Byakugan to watch out for traps, especially Genjutsu if what I found out is true." He looked at Shino. "Your condition is going to be useful now, Shino." Shino was not normal, even by Aburam standards. He didn't use sunglasses to protect his eyes like the rest of his clan, but to hide the fact he was blind. Because of that, his destruction bugs relied every kind of information to him to compensate for his lack of sight. "You will go at the back of the group," the red-tipped boy continued. "Use your beetles to scout ahead, zero on everything that may be the box, chakra, grass, dirt, anything that may give it away. I will send clones along, but right now let's stay here, wait for the info to come, but stay on guard." From where she was watching, Kurenai had to admire the blonde-rooted boy's capacity to think. Perhaps those pranks did serve a purpose after all. It took a while for the clones and bugs to find any leads, but eventually they did. "Naruto, I got 10 places with chakra and 5 with traps." The orange-fringed boy nodded and asked if he marked them. "I did. The Kakechkas are already working on the Genjutsus. I got 6 traps and 5 hiding places, but they could have been caught on illusions, so we will start with the ones that have traps." He started moving. "Shino, you guide. Hopefully I will be able to battle test some of the wind jutsus I know." Kurenai's ruby eyes widened. If the kid knew nature manipulation, his reports by academy instructors were incredibly wrong. How could they not write that? The group moved to the southwest, being mindful of what could be there. Hinata had her Byakugan activated, looking around for anything that may seem out of place. Shino was concentrating on all the images transmitted by the link he had with his familiars. Naruto himself was trying something Urukanai had taught him during the week, the same thing the man used to catch him after his pranks. A chakra D, a pulse of chakra sent around himself through the ground to sense any signature in the area. He believed it had been created by the Yondaime, but he could not be sure. It took them almost an hour and a half to check all the locations, and even then, most were duds, and the ones that weren't were filled with flash tags. In the end, they returned to the center of the training ground. Naruto and Hinata pissed at nearly being blinded, and even if he couldn't see it, Naruto could swear Shino was almost amused. When they got to the clearing at the center, they saw Kurenai in a battle-ready stance, the box dangling from her neck. A smirk crossed her face. They had already passed, but they didn't know that. "I'll admit, you were faster than expected." Her smirk grew, "but you haven't got this yet." Naruto charged as soon as she finished talking, intent on taking the chain across her neck. Hinata followed, reluctant but resolved to help out. Shino stayed back, sending a hive out of his body, helping them deal with any illusions. Naruto thrust a punch at the woman's chest, but she parried and quickly sent a palm to his face, knocking him off balance, and turned to block a palm from Hinata. She noticed that they had insects on their clothes and cursed. Her art was out the window. There was no way she could get past chakra-eating bugs. Naruto pushed himself off the ground, aiming a kick at Kurenai's stomach. She sidestepped and he fell onto Hinata, the two of them rolling on the ground, before standing up fast. "I expected better from you, Naruto-kun. You were the best on Taijutsu in the academy." That only served to rile him up, and while he was still relatively calm, it was only a matter of time till he became sloppy. He concentrated on bringing his Kage no Byuki. If anything, it would help with his reach. He made a clone and had it attack with him. The real one only half concentrated on the battle. Hinata hadn't yet gotten up, having fainted from Naruto falling on her, so he had to mind where he stepped. He and his clone continued to attack, mixing swipes and punches and kicks in an attempt to catch the Genjutsu mistress, but she only dodged, the smirk still in place. Kurenai, however, was having trouble. Shino's bugs and Naruto's constant attacks were starting to take a toll on her, and it was only a matter of time before she fell. She would have to wait the remaining 20 minutes for the second alarm to ring. The cry of Yada and a flash made her snap her eyes at Naruto. The boy had somehow equipped claws, and judging by how he looked, he knew how to use them. Said boy calmed down and smirked. The falcon talons would help. Time to kick it up a notch. To Bayo, and he kicked off, using his weapons to slash at Kurenai. The messy-haired woman cursed again and dodged. He was getting closer, and his attacks were harder to dodge. It was only a matter of time for him to get the box. She saw a stab to her head and made a decision. She sidestepped the attack and hit the boy on his arm before kicking his legs from under him. He jumped and snapped a kick at his opponent, but she ducked and punched him in the seal on his stomach, throwing him away and leaving him breathless. Shino looked at his teammates. Without them he had little chance, but he would have to try. He was about to launch a second hive and mix with it when the clock struck lunchtime, signaling the end of the exam. Naruto groaned from where he was, disappointment and discomfort clear on his face. The healing factor he got from Kurama helped in situations like this, but it was still painful having the air driven from his lungs. He got up and picked Hinata up from where she was in the ground, then he made his way to Shino, head down, but Kurenai's voice stopped him. "And where do you think you're going, Naruto?" He looked at her, confused. You may not have gotten the box, but that doesn't mean you didn't pass his face, and Shino's raised eyebrow made her chuckle. Well, this was a tracking exercise. The point wasn't that she nodded at the girl in Naruto's arms. Wake Hinata up and I'll explain. He shook the blue-haired girl and heard a mumble about multicolored foxes before she snuggled closer to his chest, making him shake harder, and she groggily opened her eyes, only blush and almost faint again after seeing how close she was to Naruto. He gently put her down, her face glowing a bright red, and looked at the woman that started speaking again. You see, Konoha, above all else, values teamwork. Most Jounin sensei's test will somehow involve teamwork. One of the most used is the bell test, but some will use a different one. I, for example, used the test to see if you could form a strategy that included the three of you, instead of going everyone by yourselves, without any help, in which case I would put you in a binding genjutsu until lunch. The three nodded, though Naruto was curious, so because I took them too. He pointed at his sides. His arms crossed into account when I made the plan. We, the bandage-covered woman, nodded. Yes, Naruto-kun, you, Shino-kun and Hinata-chan are officially genin. Naruto cheered, throwing his arms around his new teammates, making Hinata blush, but even then, she smiled, and if one were to look up the bug user's collar, they would have noticed a small smile. 3 weeks later, half past noon, Naruto was trying to get the hang of one of the exercises his sensei had given them, the weapon balancing. The concept was fairly simple. By using your chakra, you make any kind of cutting weapon stay balanced in the palms of your hand, but any slip on your concentration and the weapon would fall, piercing your hand. Hinata was the first to get it because of her clan techniques, which required chakra control as perfect as it could get. Then Shino got it 2 hours late, and now, Naruto was still attempting to do it, and they had started 5 hours ago. The only redeeming quality of the day was that Kurenai-sensei had allowed him to use his shadow clones to help, and that it would make the process of calling the Falcon Talons forth faster. His training with Team 8 had consisted of chakra control, teamwork exercises and individual training, and in the afternoons they did mission, if you could call D ranks that, and after that it was free time, which Naruto used to train further with his Kake Genkai and his Fuinjutsu, along with the bits of training Kurama gave him, which hadn't been much, only the most basic form of foxfire. He could now summon his Kage no Byuki in 45 seconds instead of a full minute, and his mother was starting him on barrier seals. He would prefer battle seals, but that would have to wait, since those were the dark arts of seals, almost nobody specialized on them, and those that did barely shared anything. The day was one of the few days that they didn't go on a mission, because sensei was introducing them to one of her friends. So, who's the brat you want me to help? There they were, walking alongside Kurenai was a purple-haired woman, clad in a standard Anbo armor, a sword and a cat mask at her waist, suggesting she was a swords master. Naruto thought she looked somehow familiar. The one sitting with the kunai sticking out of his hand. Indeed, due to his lack of concentration, he had let the kunai drop. He idly noted the sting that the injury produced. Finally the dots connected to the young boy. He knew that woman, Nico Ni-chan. He quickly stood up and went to hug her, his arms crushing her stomach and his head snuggled to her chest. Kurenai hid her smile as she looked at the two, as amused as her other two students. Nico pinched the bridge of her nose. Well, she was happy to see the kid. He was still too loud for her. That and, I told you when you were younger that if you ever saw me off duty, you were to call me Yugao. The boy only looked at her and blinked, all the while holding an innocent expression on his face. Okay Yugao-ni, and he snuggled again. Yugao looked at the boy, latched onto her. Naruto, get off. Kurenai-chan asked me to help you train with your weapon, so you have to show me good you are. Sub-Arash plus, Ni-chan's going to train me. Dadabayo. He started dancing around, happy that he would be seeing his Ni-chan as much as he did when he was 6. She sighed in exasperation. Naruto, calm down and show me. A boy chuckled sheepishly and concentrated on his bloodline. While he did this, Yugao created a reinforced shadow clone to have it test the excitable kid. When she saw the golden tools appearing, she looked at Kurenai and asked, those look like the ones. Kurenai interrupted her. He is her son, it's only right that he would inherit something other than her personality. Yugao smiled and nodded. The two looked at Naruto, just in time to see the fight start. Training ground 8 noon. Right Naruto, I'm going to see how good you are with those. Yugao pointed at the golden claws attached to Naruto's limbs, and then I'll come up with ways to help you train. If you're testing me, he frowned, then why are you a clone? Wouldn't you dispel if I hit you? He knew the shadow clones were weak and it couldn't be a blood clone. Those took as much time as a Mizu Bunshin to create. He should know that he had a shadow clone create a water one while he himself created a blood clone that had left him exhausted. He had stayed in his mindscape for a whole day. He hadn't tried to make another Chiseo Bunshin since that incident. Yugao sighed. The boy had had 3 weeks and hadn't thought of reinforced clones. No Naruto, when you put extra chakra in a single clone, without molding it to be an explosive one, it will take more hits to dispel. I am a reinforced clone. The boy nodded in understanding. That would help in battles. So I attack as if you were the original Yugao-ni. The woman nodded and lowered herself to a ready stance, knees bent, right foot forward, left pointing outwards and her body sideways, with her sword held diagonally in front of her. Naruto did the same, his stance was pretty low, almost crouching, with his hands held one in front and the other across his stomach, his feet were digging onto the ground for faster movements. Alright, let's start Adebayo. They stood there, waiting for the other to make the first move, but while the orange-fringed boy may have been slightly more patient thanks to meditation, he could not wait to start, so kicking off the ground, he rushed at the purple-haired woman, attempting a diagonal slash at her chest, but it was blocked by her sword. He tried to kick her, but she moved, the suddenness of it throwing him off balance, and she took advantage from it, making a stabbing move at his centrum. He moved back, but the attack still nicked him, a drop of blood flowing from the small wound. The cat Anbu spun around, slashing at her opponent, trying to cut him from shoulder to shoulder, but her attack was blocked. She narrowed her eyes and jumped over a low kick from Naruto, dropping her sword into the head of the boy, who moved his head just in time to avoid being cut, but still losing some hairs. The boy kicked high, wanting to impale his talons on the clone's neck, but the attack was parried, which left him open for a slash at his ribs, blood quickly rushing down from the wound, a grimace gracing his face. He tried a double slash with his hands, but that too was blocked. He grunted at the pressure the woman was putting on his arms, some sparks jumping from the clashing weapons. The Anbu captain kicked at his stomach, making him cross his arms in front of him, which was what the woman wanted. She started another slash, this time starting at the hip, it was dodged, but she kept attacking, her barrage leaving Naruto, with the only option being to dodge. Finally the blonde managed to parry a stab from Yugao, taking advantage of the fact that the sword expert was left open. He went for a cut to her hip, only managing to cut the clothing, but he kept at it, throwing a vertical slash to her left side, but it was sidestepped. That is the best you can do? Naru-chan the perplet teased, making the blonde more frustrated. I've cut you 3 times now, and you have only nicked me once, and it was true he had been on the defensive for most of the mock battle. The realization hit the blonde hard, angering him and making him call on an unnoticeable amount of Kyuubi's chakra, only enough to make him slightly faster and change his eyes. He jumped, aiming for a stab at the clone, which barely blocked, having expected a slower and weaker charge. The clone looked at the boy's face and gasped at the blue-turned red eyes. The red-tipped boy did a roundhouse kick, the talons nicking the clone on the waist, and used the momentum for a straight kick. The woman jumped back, before rushing at the angry boy, the sword tip on the ground, before bringing it up to a cut in the chest of the kid, making blood jump from the wound. Naruto collapsed to his knees, before falling to the ground, the falcon talons disappearing as soon as he hit the ground. Hinata is at his side in seconds, turning him over, and started applying her healing salve, sealing the wounds even faster than they normally would. The clone dispelled, sending the encounter to the original, who held her head when the memory hit her. Well, I got what I needed from him, I'll start planning his training tomorrow. Kurenai frowned at her friend. Did you have to be so rough on him? The last slash could have maimed him. She was worried for the kid, she didn't exactly how far his healing went, and she didn't really want to find out. It was necessary, the purple-haired woman started, aware of the look the raven-haired sensei was giving her. He was starting to channel the beast's chakra. Had I not knocked him out, he would have gone berserk. Kurenai's ruby-colored eyes widened, her student had called on that power. Yugao's voice brought her out of her thoughts. I don't think it was a conscious thing. Remember how my clone taunted him? She nodded. My best guess is that his annoyance at being called Naru-chan, coupled with his frustration at constantly being on the defensive and only cutting the clone once, made him subconsciously call on it. The messy-haired woman sighed. Guess I'll have to put more time into meditation. She looked at her longtime friend. How do you plan on training him? I'm going to take him 3 times a week. During the time you are teaching them hand-to-hand combat. Yugao closed her eyes. He is skilled for his age. Hell, I doubt anyone his age can use those things. She opened her eyes and gazed at the fallen boy. Does he know his elements? She asked. Yes, Kurenai answered. Wind and water. He knows a few jutsus too. She looked at her team. Shino had moved and was now helping Hinata to move the unconscious boy to the shade of a tree. I'm going to test their affinity soon, see if they have one. Yugao nodded and the two went to the kids. 30 minutes later, Naruto woke up uncomfortable, feeling a bit stiff from where his knee-chan had cut him. So, Saki, what did you learn today? Kushina's voice made him groan, the memory of his spar with Yugao still fresh. To never fight someone better if I can help it. It had tired him too. Yugao was obviously better than Kurenai-sensei. She was more aggressive too. And that you should never piss off a woman that can wield a weapon, Kurama said sagely, nodding at his own words inside the seal. To always stay calm in battle would be a better advice to Bayo. He opened his eyes and sat up, wincing slightly as a wave of pain hit him. He looked around, noticing 4 blurry figures. He blinked and rubbed his eyes, finally able to distinguish his team, Yugao and Kurenai-sensei. Moo, One-chan is mean, he pouted, his eyes watering. Just as Yugao was about to speak, he continued, every trace of the pout gone. So, Ni-chan, when do you start my training? am I going to learn to use the sword too? Yuigao sighed again. The blonde-rooted boy hadn't lost his energy. Like I told Kurenai, you will be training with me 3 times a week. During the time you are practicing taijutsu, she looked at his new apprentice. Although, if, and only if, you manage to master those claws of yours, I'll teach you swordsmanship. Yada, I'm going to be so awesome. Tabeyo a punch to the top of his head made him face plant. Baka, mastering a weapon can take years. I'm surprised you got as good as you are with the one you use as young as you are. The purple-haired woman helped him stand up again. Finish what you were doing before I came. And Naruto, we start tomorrow with it. She shunshined out of the training ground. The next day 10 am. An excited Naruto was standing before an exasperated Yuigao. He was practically vibrating with excitement. Naruto, calm down, she told him. We won't start anything until after you condition your body. The boy pouted. Your claws, talon, or whatever you call them, rely on speed and maneuverability, so unless you are fast and agile, they are little else than knives. She chuckled at his looks, probably outraged at his bloodline being compared to normal weapons. What I want you to do is to run as fast as you can around the training ground until you can't run anymore, almost like the time you broke into the Anbu compound for a prank. And so he did. With a groan he went running into the tree line and to circle the fence surrounding their training ground. It would be almost an hour when he collapsed in front of an amused Yuigao, who had a smile at seeing the normally hyper boy panting on the ground. You have 10 minutes to rest, then we start another exercise. The boy could only groan. The next exercise was fairly simple, dodge all the balls thrown at him, easy right? Not quite. Yuigao was ruthless, throwing them at speeds he could barely follow, and mixing the height as low as his shins and as high as his forehead, almost never aiming at the same spot. Needless to say, by the end of the day, he was sore, with bruises all over his body, and left with a sense of disappointment at not having learned anything. 4 weeks later 2 p.m. Teammate was standing in front of the Hokage, giving a report of a successful mission. Or at least, Kurenai was. Naruto was staring at the end of the universe. Hinata was poking her fingers together, stealing glances at Naruto and Shino, the latter remaining as still and silent as ever. Very well Kurenai-chan, I'll give your team a C rank. The heads of the trio immediately snapped to the aged leader. He was giving them a higher mission. A few days ago a farmer came asking for help at setting up his farm. Naruto groaned, more chores, oh well, at least he would be getting out of the village for a while. You must set the fence where he tells you, and then help him escort the animals needed to his farm. The aged leader looked at the team across the desk, and he mentally chuckled at look Naruto was giving him. Alright you 3, I want you to pack for at least a week, 2 at the most. Kurenai told her pupils, meet me in 2 hours at the western. She looked at the Hokage for confirmation. At his nod she continued, at the western gate, don't be late. After her dismissal, the 3 members of Team 8 went their ways, each of them thinking of their upcoming mission. Westgate 4 p.m. Kurenai arrived a few minutes after the rest of her squad to find them checking their equipment, Hinata almost hiding in her backpack, Shino with his hand inside his own pack, and Naruto sealing and unsealing things from a scroll. Alright you 3, you have everything you need. At their nod she smiled, good then let's get going, hopefully we can make it before sunset. Susamage plus, I'm going out of Konoha thought the hyper. Calm down Saki, remember what I've told you, the outside world is very different from the interior of the village walls his Kachan told him, as she had many times before, every time he went to hunt. I know Kachan, but I can't help but feel excited. It's the first time I've went out for something other than hunting, and it was true, he rarely ever left the walls, only to train, which left him still relatively close to the walls, and to hunt, for which he only went a mile of the village. Listen to Kushina, she may be a worrywart, but she means well. Shortly after saying that, Kurama was hit over the head by an angry mother. Who are you calling worrywart Tebane? Kushina never tolerated teasing, not even from her late husband, so everyone who messed with her did it at their own risk. Kachan, if you're going to hit Kurama then wait till the link is cut. Naruto grumbled, you're going to give me a headache. He got no response, meaning she had cut the mind link in order to beat the kitsune to a pulp. He pitied the poor guy. His sensei's voice brought him out of his conversation. Good we're here. That's what he hated of the link. It made time seem faster than it really was. Let's go to the house and tell them we've arrived. The house was pretty big, with a height of 3 stories, and if he was right, at least 4 rooms per floor. It had a barn attached to the back, probably so they could access the animals more easily when they were brought in. His teacher knocked the door, and after a few moments it was opened by a man in his late 30s. I suppose you are the team they sent. To Kurenai's nod, he smiled. Good, please come in, I've been waiting for you. Didn't expect kids quite as young, though he glanced at the 3 teens. Almost no one does, Mr. Hokkaido-min, he quickly told her. Uhi Kurenai, the boy with multicolored hair is Uzumaki Naruto, the one with the high collar is Aburame Shino, and the blue-haired one is Hyuga Hinata. She motioned to her team, each of them nodding when their name was said. Now, could you please give us a better description of what you want us to do, Hokkaido-san? Yes, of course, Yuuhi-san. The man invited them to sit down. They did. From some time I've been saving in order to start this farm, But no matter where I went I couldn't find someone willing to make the fence, even if I already have the materials ready, so I asked you Cage for help, especially since the cows and sheep I ordered will get here by next week, so I just could not wait for someone to help. So you want us to do what others didn't want to? Kurenai interrupted. Don't worry, we'll have the fence ready in time to escort the animals, you don't have to worry. Thank you, Kurenai-san, Hokkaido told them. Now I believe it's time for dinner, please, join us. Teammate didn't want to intrude, seeing as they had their own provisions, but they didn't want to seem rude either, so they followed Min to the dining room of Min's farmhouse. Min led them away from the living room and to a large room that was rather spacious. Not only that, but it was also heavily decorated, with pictures, portraits and sculptures everywhere. Nins, please meet my wife, Utsukish. Plus he motioned to a woman that obviously kept herself in good condition, with a kind face, light brown hair and hazel eyes, and my son, Genkona. He pointed to a kid, probably 7, who was staring at them with an inquisitive face, obviously wondering who they were. Pleased to meet you, Utsukish plus and Genkona-san, I hope we aren't intruding, Kurenai told the woman. Oh no, not at all, the woman replied. She was obviously accustomed to having guests. Please do sit down, I was about to serve dinner. The dish she served was a simple mushroom soup that did not make it any less appreciated by the Konohinin. Hey, why do you have so many tattoos? Genkona asked Naruto, who motioned to wait a bit since he was chewing a particularly difficult shroom. Well, he swallowed and started talking. The ones on my hands and arms are storage seals, so I don't have to carry so much stuff all the time. He pointed at his chest and then at his wrists. This ones are weight, so I'm always training my strength, and this too, he showed the ones on his palms, are so I can launch needles better. Sugoi, Genkona breathed. And what of the one you have on your stomach? It looks funny. He was talking of his Jinchuriki seal, that was a spiral with 4 wiggly lines coming from it. Ah well, he scratched the back of his head, that one's a bit special, he sighed. It marks me as a sacrifice for the betterment of the village. The farmers gasped, the kid was to be sacrificed. It means that I was chosen as the he hesitated. Cage, yes cage, of a very dark power, and I have to keep it inside of me, so it doesn't injure anybody. So you are basically like one of the shrines of Oni no Kuni? Min asked him, you hold something back? He was curious, he had heard of demon containers, but he had never heard of a living one. Yeah, you could say that, though I wish Kachan wasn't trapped. The last part was left unspoken. Me too, Saki, but we have to wait for a way to get us out without killing you. Kurama nodded in agreement, even though he didn't see it, he could feel it. Odarakubeki, you're like a hero or something. Naruto smiled both wistfully and in amusement, if only the villagers could see it like that. The rest of the night was spent talking, Kurenai about the mission and Naruto with the younger boy about whatever came to mind. The next day, alright team, Hokkaido-san told us to make the fence a mile out in every direction. The members of Team 8 were holding a shovel, a mace, and a stack of wooden poles each. Today you are going to start digging the holes and starting the north side of the fence. You'll have 2 breaks, one at lunchtime and another 2 hours before dinner. The 3 genin nodded. I'll be using shadow clones to keep an eye on you, so no slacking off. The young genin left in the same general direction, but during the way they decided that they should start each on a different part. Shino would start from the east to the center, where he would meet with Naruto, who would do the western and eastern center, while Hinata would do the east part of the section, and so, the teens separated. Naruto's part, the blonde-rooted boy was currently in trying to move a rock that he had found on where he started to dig. It wouldn't be so bad had the rock not been so big and heavy, so he, along with a pair of clones, were digging out the rock, so they would just have to roll it out of the hole. Hey, boss, how the hell did this get here? Clone number 1 asked. How should I know? For all I care we could just blow to Kingdom Come, Naruto replied. Then why don't we? Clone number 2 whined. Because, boss forgot to bring the ink for seal drawing. Clone number 3 was a flux on a technique, a clone that had developed a different personality. And he can't use blood because. Number 1 formed a hand seal, you know what? Forget it, I'm just blowing the damn thing up with me, and he exploded, popping the other 2 clones, causing a cave-in, and launching the original to the skies. He would awaken from his landing 30 minutes later and start making Cage Bunshin to dig and impale the poles, while he himself nailed planks to connect them. Hinata's part, the Blinette, being a member of the Hyuga clan, used her Byakugan to see where the best places to put the poles were and started doing her part of the job, occasionally wiping a thread of sweat when they appeared. Shino's part, a stoic boy could be seen with a shovel in his hands, adjusting it many times before he would dig the hole and plant the stake, repeating the process until he deemed enough and connected them with planks. Kurenai, she had to say, she was proud of her students. Sure, they weren't the most normal of the bunch, a shy heiress, a quiet blind boy, and a hyperactive Jinchuriki. They were kids, innocent to the ways of the world. The only one that was not so naive was probably Naruto. The poor boy had been alone most of his life, abused both orally and emotionally. Hopefully he would stay just as he was right now and not snap and kill them all. She could only wonder what would have happened had his mother lived. Would he be different? Would he take even more after her? Would he even be a ninja? She did not let those thoughts get to her, for all intents and purposes she was their family now, she would help them become the very best they could be. 6 days later, it had taken teammate the best part of the week, but they had done it, they had finished setting up the perimeter of the farm, and now they would go escort the caravan of animals that would inhabit the barn. We probably won't encounter anything more than a couple of bandits at the most, Kurenai told her team as they were setting off from the town. Min was at the front of the caravan, carrying his son on his shoulder, the boy looking around in wonder. Still, keep your guard up, you know the formation. She asked her team, who nodded, right, then get to your positions. The formation had Hinata walking at the back of the convoy, Naruto and Shino at the sides, and Kurenai-sensei at the front with Min. Naruto would create 6 clones and had them walk around the animals, keeping an eye on the spots Hinata couldn't reach with her eyes, and generally messing with the cows. They hadn't really seen anything that gave them any real trouble, a wolf seeking food over here, a cow or sheep wandering off, and the occasional bear that crossed their path. All in all, it seemed rather like a vacation more than anything. That evening, thank you for helping us setting up, Min was telling them when they reached the farm. I don't think the fence would be finished had you not come. No worries Hokkaido-san, it is our job to help, after all, the Genjutsu mistress replied. Still, thank you for doing. He was interrupted by the cry of a hawk overhead, before said hawk landed on the arm of the sensei of teammate. She took the scroll attached to the creature's leg, before sending it back to where it came from. Her eyebrows marred into a frown when she read the message, before her eyes widened. Sorry Hokkaido-san, we will have to leave earlier than expected, she called for her team, and when they arrived she set off, the kids hesitating before catching up. Hokage-sama assigned us to a flash mission. Without glancing back she started to explain. The flash mission is one that has to be taken care of right after it is requested. Normally, the only to be considered for that are the A ranks and S ranks, but occasionally, a lower ranking mission is made flash. She glanced back at her students, her expression grim. We have been assigned to take care of a group of bandits that recently attacked an unprotected village. They razed it to the ground and kidnapped what few survivors there were. This is what the team was meant to be for, a cleaning mission. She looked forward again, praying to whatever deity there was that her children wouldn't change much from the experience. Forest of High no Kuni. Teammate was immersed each in their own thoughts, thinking about the upcoming task, eliminating a camp full of bandits, meaning they would have to kill. They had expected it, but they didn't think it would be so soon. I have to trust them, besides, if they break down I'll be there to help. Despite repeating this to herself, Kurenai could not help but think that it would scar them more than what was necessary. Logic told me I would have to do it eventually. I would prefer to do it with Tucson and Kasan nearby though. In truth, the young Abiram was scared. What if he liked it? What if he couldn't cope with it? He wouldn't like to cause grief to his family and friends, but what would happen to him after this? I don't want to kill, I don't like hurting people. The young Hyuga was probably faring the worst out of the 4. Her gentle disposition was both her greatest advantage and her weakest point. She was everything a Hyuga was not supposed to be. The problem came from the fact that, while not physically, she had been abused emotionally, which led to a very meek personality. Maybe she wouldn't be like that had her clan believed in her. Right now, the poor girl was an emotional wreck and would probably faint at the simplest of surprises. I'll have to kill, I knew it was coming, but damn, Naruto had been prepared. His mother had given him the task of raising a rabbit and killing it after it was mature enough to help drive the shock of killing out of the red-tipped boy. Saki, just remember, you have me, you have Kurama, and you have your team. We'll all help you go through it. Kushina was worried for her son. She knew his will was strong as hers and his father's, but killing was known to bring down even the strongest of minds, despite their attempts at making it easier to bear. The only thing you need to remember is to stay calm, otherwise my chakra may leak. Other than that, the only advice I can give is just do it. Kurama never was like most demons. He was childish, he was immature, and he didn't like bloodlust. Some might say that he was born a human and corrupted by the power given to him, and in a way it was true. When he first got his power, he started every fight he could, but though the centuries of his existence, he had watched as humans killed each other and slowly came to hate the act of ever wasting blood. Granted, he had done it a few times before being sealed, but he never killed innocents if he could help it. The kid knew that as ninjas they would have to kill, especially considering how their team was made. Opinions didn't matter as long as the mission was complete and your comrade safe. Kurenai stopped, making her charges do the same. She pointed at the camp, some tents scattered about and a wooden palisade surrounding them, and asked Hinata, "What do you see?" The girl activated her eyes, veins bulging, and concentrated on the tent's bellow. There are around 60 signatures moving. Oh, only 2 of them get past academy level, one a Chunin, the other Genin. Do you see where the captured people are? High, on the shack outside the hurdle she pointed to a place on the side northern end. That's where the G-Genin signature is, the Chunin one is on the west end. The red-eyed woman considered her words, she could take care of the Chunin level 1 easily, while the rest of her team took care of the camp. Shino, you will enter on the south and start moving toward the center. Hinata, the same with you in the east. Narratum, you enter through the shack, eliminate the bandit there, leave a clone with the prisoners, and then move inwards. I'll take the west, she sighed. Here, take this, the comm pieces we use when catching Tora. She handed them a headset, which they out on. If anything happens, tell me. One advice, just don't think about it until we are alone. Closed her eyes, and when she opened them, they weren't looking at their sensei, they were looking at an experienced team leader. Move out, she said, and disappeared, the others soon going their ways. Western sector of the camp. Gurenai arrived in a shunshin, behind a group of drunken bandits, stumbling their way through others, sometimes tripping. She used a genjutsu to immobilize them, before swiftly killing them with accurate shuriken throws, thud signifying their fall to the ground, blood rushing from their wounds. Just as she was about to go off and search, her instinct screamed and she jumped, just in time to miss being impaled by a sword. Well, it seems that you managed to dodge Satsugai-sha. I had hoped you wouldn't. Next to the sword there was a man in his 20s, a cocky smirk in place, eyes ogling at Kurenai's figure. I don't suppose you could come with me. We would have a great time. The man was 6'4", with brown hair, hazel eyes and a figure of someone who practiced every once in a while. Kurenai narrowed her eyes at the man burying Kurashi. She muttered, a B-rank missing nin from Takigakure, a bit troubling, considering she didn't have a weapon, but her kunai and shuriken, well he had a sword, his reach was bigger, and he probably knew how to dispel illusions. Still, Meijin. Jigoku no Shichim, forming hand seals, she put him under one of her easiest ninjutsus and rushed at him, kunai at the ready. Kurashi brought his hands up and dispelled the technique, but Kurenai was already upon him, slashing with her weapon of choice. He blocked and kicked her feet, but she performed a jump and kicked at his side, hearing the satisfying crunch of a broken rib. The missing nin grunted and pushed her away before preparing his own jutsu, Doten. Doro no Kawa, he announced before spiting a large stream of mud at the genjutsu mistress, forcing her to dodge. He ended the technique and charged, sword at his side. Kurenai blocked his slash and put him in a false surrounding illusion when he looked at her in the eyes. Kurashi saw the woman he was fighting disappear and whirled around, expecting an attack. When it didn't come, he narrowed his eyes before raising his hands to the ram seal. Before he could, however, a pain in his right hand caused him to drop his sword and his perception to become normal again. Kurenai had moved from where she was standing as soon as her Shikai no Knives took effect, disengaging from the stalemate and slashed the dominant hand of her opponent, making him drop the sword. This, however, had the side effect of raising him from the illusion. She ducked under an enraged punch, followed by rolling to the side of a falling kick and lashed out to the closest target that just so happened to be the back of his knee, making him fall to the ground. Just as she was about to pierce his chest in order to kill him, Kurashi made a few hand signs and whispered, Kaiten. Jaiko Bakuhatsu before he exploded in a ball of flames, intent of taking the bitch who defeated him with him. Kurenai barely had the time to do a substitution. The eastern side of the compound, Hinata was quietly sneaking around, slashing the throats of the bandits that were unaware. Tears were running down her face, the weight of what she was doing fully registering on her mind. Occasionally someone would see her before being silenced by a Gyuuken strike to the heart, effectively killing them by a heart attack. But about halfway to the center a guard saw her and she couldn't reach him before he shouted the alarm. Seconds later an explosion was seen, followed by a near unbearable amount of killing intent bathed the camp. She did the only thing she could think about. Run. Southern sector, Shino was using a combination of his bugs and throwing weapons to dispose of every bandit he found. If one were to see him, they would think him the perfect shinobi, calm in the face of death. But in reality he was soaking the interior of his coat with sweat and a grimace was plastered on his face, showing his not so obvious discomfort at having to kill. He was finishing off a particularly stubborn bandit when he heard the explosion, before being shocked still when the killing intent washed upon him. On the back of his mind, he registered that the man that was giving him problems dropped to the floor. Northern sector, Naruto was in his element. The shadows had been his refuge when he played a prank or when a mob formed to hurt him. He was a creature of the shadows, moving without seeing, only sensing the things around him. He sneaked past several low-class bandits, drunks that were on the verge of slipping into an alcohol-induced coma, towards the small shack where Hinata had told him the captives were held. At the back of his mind he was hoping to get a fight before he had to kill, which would help him deal with the stress of the deed. He was about to make it to the door of the shack when he was bombarded by a rain of explosive kunai, making him jump back from his position. Well, look at what we got here. An arrogant voice reached his ears, making him raise his head and prepare his falcon talons. The owner of said voice was a man in his late teens, with dark hair, dark blue eyes, wore a piece of what could only be stolen armor, and black pants. I wonder, how could you sneak until here without being detected? the man asked. That is none of your business, Databeo, the hyperactive boy answered. Oh my, snappy aren't we? He chuckled before growing serious and throwing more explosives at the boy, who dodged them and responded in kind. The man jumped from his perch on top of the house to dodge, only to move out of the way of a kunai-wielding hand attempting to skewer him. The man, let's all call him Beagles, flipped back, making seals along the way. When he landed he let his jutsu fly Kaiten. Kakakyu no jutsu, out of his mouth came a giant fireball, heading straight at Naruto. Naruto cursed. If it weren't for the fact that he wanted his talons out as fast as possible, he would have performed a Suiton technique, but as it was, the only technique he could use were his shadow clones. He created 10 of them, substituting himself with a log to a nearby tree, and watched Beagles fight the clone while he concentrated on his bloodline. Beagles cursed when he saw the clones appear. He knew they were real when one pushed another out of the way, and prepared for what he knew would be deathmatch. He ducked under a punch and lashed out to the clone that attacked him, only for him to snap his arm back when a kunai came close. The clone threw a kick that overextended, and Beagles capitalized on that, throwing a shuriken at the crotch. He winced when it hit. The clone may be his opponent, but he didn't wish on anyone that fate. The fight now reduced to 9-on-1, he made a kawarimi, and prepared another jutsu, Kaiten. Hinatama Patsu, he spit a fireball upwards. Said fireball divided 10 feet off the ground and fell on 4 unlucky clones. He threw shuriken after shuriken, managing to dispel another clone before he was engaged on a 4-on-1 battle. The clone hit him on the shoulder, almost dislocating it before he received a kick on the thighs. He snapped his arm to the clone on his right, hitting him on the neck. Beagles jumped over a low kick, lashing backwards, but his kick was caught and he suffered a cut on his sheen before nailing the clone with another kick, this one hitting head-on. The last 2 clones charged and he weaved between strikes, throwing a kunai that caught each on the head. His instinct screamed and he rolled to the side, finding a clawed foot falling where he was. Naruto, the original one, went in for a stab that was parried before slashing with his other hand, which was blocked by a kunai. He disengaged, backpedaling, and waited. He assessed the damage his clones had inflicted. His opponent had a 2 wound on his leg, 1 on the arm, and his clothes were cut to ribbons. He blocked a kunai charge and snapped his left leg upwards, attempting a horizontal slash at the chest. The attempt was barely dodged, thin lines of red flowing slowly down the slash top on Beagles. Without waiting for a counterattack, he threw his leg downwards and used the momentum to carry him for a double cut. Beagles knew he couldn't win. The brat that had confronted him had too much energy. The 10 clones were proof of that. He didn't look winded at all. And then there were those weird glowing claws of his. The damn things had made an already hard battle into an almost impossible one. He just didn't have anything that could help him against them. He could try another jutsu, but that would mean leaving himself without chakra to help stop the bleeding of his injuries. He tried to block the upcoming axe-shaped cut, only to feel a searing pain where his arms were. He lifted them to his face, only to find a pair of bloody stumps where his forearms used to be. Just as Beagle was about to scream, a blade found his neck, cutting his windpipe just before he saw the world spin and the ground to come closer. Naruto stood still as he watched Beagle's head fall to the ground with a thud. As if on cue, when the corpse fell, he vomited. He threw up everything he had eaten in the day. After several minutes of dry heaving, he moved to the shack, smashing the door with his talons that he dematerialized immediately afterwards. What he saw brought him out of his post-kill shock and into another kind of shock, one of anger. Men, women and children were all lying inside cages. Their clothes were mostly rags, blood and dirt smearing them. The floor of the cages was incredibly dirty with feces and blood. But what made him almost give in to his rage was a single girl, probably a year younger than Konohamaru. The poor girl was tied to a wall, the rags covering her even bloodier than the ones he saw on the people inside the cages. Her eyes were swollen shut, and every visible part of her body was purple. Lastly, some red lines were visible from the gashes on her clothes. He made a clone and had set up a clean space where the girl could rest, while he untied her and applied some of the healing salve Hinata had given everyone on the team before taking her to the clone. He laid her down where the clone pointed and said, "Stay with her, especially if she wakes up. If anybody wakes up, give them a flask." He unsealed all the salve he had. "Do not dispel, no matter what happens." When the clone nodded, afraid of what the boss could do when angry, Naruto walked out the door. "Saki, calm down, I know you're angry, and I'm too, but don't let it get to you." He vaguely heard his mother speak, but it was really low. "Git, calm the hell down, if you don't you'll go into a rampage again." Even with his booming voice, Kurama was barely heard. He jumped the wall surrounding the camp and let his rage be announced with an unearthly roar, his body covered by a flame-like chakra. Kurenai cursed when she heard a roar that could only mean her student had been angered, and cursed again when the oppressive killing intent washed over her, immobilizing every bandit around her. "Shino, Hinata, you have to get out of the camp, now." She shouted to the intercom, unknowingly snapping the former out of his stupor and the later to run faster. It would be 5 minutes later when her students, minus Naruto, appeared and another 10 for the Kai to banish. Back with Naruto. Naruto had changed. His hair was now a bloody red color, as were his eyes. His hands and feet had grown claws instead of nails. His head became more pronounced and his whiskers darker, making him look much like a humanized red, snarling fox. With another roar he charged at the tents in front of him, slashing at everything that dared get on his path of destruction. His hand snapped to the right, piercing the chest of a paralyzed bandit. He charged chakra to his throat before realizing it with a scream, launching everything he could see backwards, men dying when they fell on their necks. The second roar had the side effect of waking the bandits of their shocks, making them charge at the threat, intent on eliminating him, but every single one of them met bloody ends. He spun around, hand in the air, and cut open the armed men that were trying to surround him, blood and guts falling from the gashes. A tail grew out of the chakra surrounding him. He jumped forward and rolled, his new tail acting as a whip to smash anything it touched. 15 minutes into his rampage the last of the bandits fell, and with him the cloak around Naruto. Teammate. Naruto found his teammates huddled into their sensei and flinched a bit, knowing it was him that caused them to be like that. The camp is destroyed, he said with a hollow voice that made his sensei flick. The captives are with a clone of mine, I'll lead you there. Kurenai stood up slowly, careful of staying close to her shivering students, and followed the new redeed, though he still had a spot of orange on top of his head. What happened, Naruto? Kurenai asked. We felt a powerful presence not too long ago. Naruto was quiet for a moment before answering in the same monotone. They had a kid tied up to a wall, I helped her and left the house being watched by a clone. He looked down, she had been tortured, I snapped. That was what she had feared. She should have sent Shino or Hinata, but he was the strongest of the three and she had been sure he wouldn't let his emotions get the best of him. They walked in silence after that, Kurenai thinking of the repercussions her decision could bring. They arrived to the shack with a broken door, Naruto dispelling the clone and moving to the side of the little girl he had rescued. The effects of the salve he had applied were already apparent, her skin was already darkening and becoming less upset. He moved closer, putting her head on his lap while rubbing her scalp. He stared at nothing, his thoughts on what he had done, willingly or driven by rage. He had killed more than 3 dozens of people, despicable people, but people nonetheless. He glanced down to the girl resting on his lap. He didn't really know why, but he was feeling protective of the child. It probably was because of how his childhood was. He was alone most of his early years, and even when he met his mother in Kurama he was lonely at times. He decided then that he would protect the kid, take her to Konoha if she was an orphan and adopt her. The rest of teammate had been working on releasing the captives and waking them up before giving them a flask of healing salve and helping them get outside, telling them to wait. Kurenai laid a hand on the redhead's shoulder. Everyone is outside, we're moving out, she told him. He nodded and with care lifted her to a bridal carry. Going back home, forests of Hai no Kuni around midnight. Naruto was still a storm of emotions when the group of 4 ninja and 90 people stopped for the night. Anger, at the bandits that stole this people's lives. Pity, because they had lost what they had. Self-anger, that he had lost control badly enough to go berserk. Compassion towards the girl on his arms. And sadness that he hadn't heard from his Kachan or Kurama since then. During the time it took to get from the now destroyed camp to the small clearing they now were, Naruto had taken to asking questions about the girl, what her name was. Did somebody know her? Was she liked? Most people had answered no to the questions and the ones that didn't had only seen her by passing, so he could only assume she was an orphan. Kurenai sensei had told them to get food, it was now half an hour later. He had made clones and had them gather berries and game animals. Hinata and Shino had gone for water to a stream nearby. The berries the clones had brought were now finished, every single one had been eaten. The rabbits, hares and squirrels the clones had caught were roasting over a fire. The ex-captives were eyeing them with hunger, they probably weren't fed in there. He had applied more salve to the girl that was still sleeping. Her injuries were now mostly superficial, a few bruises and scrapes. She was still dirty though, so the only thing he could tell was that she was a few months younger than Konohamaru. He grabbed 2 animals from the fire, sealing one to give it to the girl when she awakened. He really had to give her a name, he couldn't just call her girl, and starting to nibble on the other, savoring the flavor. He hadn't eaten hare in Monsa ND, he was starting to miss the taste. He went to his tent shortly after finishing the whole animal, the child still close to him. He missed the hopeful look on his team's girl, the sad glance from his teacher, and the slightly unnerved look he got from the Abiram. He unsealed a small futon from one of the few scrolls he actually carried and laid on one side, the small child he had carried on the other side. He lied awake for a long time before finally succumbing to his sleep. Unfortunately he would awaken many times during the night, never sleeping for more than an hour at a time and always closer to the girl he had saved. The next morning, Naruto awoke yet again without breath, panting and sweating after experiencing the same carnage from another perspective. He had awoken many times during the night because of the same nightmare, the carnage he was responsible of seen from an outsider point of view. He sat there, cover pooling at his hips, panting and staring off 100 yards, the previous night replaying on his mind. The only good thing was that he would probably get a little sister. He glanced at his low right, the poor thing had snuggled close to him during the night, in between his episodes. She was still covered in dirt and blood, but it was mostly dry, and the only injury he could see was a gash on her shoulder, but that was scabbed already. It would probably fall off in a week, a day or two, if he used what little salve he had, something he didn't want to use. Not yet at least. He reluctantly got up and out of the tent, leaving a clone in case the girl woke up and wanted an explanation. He was the only one awake. The men and women they released from their cages were either sleeping inside tents or close to their couples. It was refreshing in a way. These people had lost their home, yet acted as if though this was just a camping trip. He wished he was still naive, able to sleep without nightmares. It had lessened after his 5th birthday, the night he met his mother. The past night his sleep was restless, the seal had blocked to allow time for his body to get used to Yaki still coursing through him, so he couldn't hear his He moved through the forest, once again hunting for food. His clones had set up traps last night. He would collect the catches still there, and catch whatever he could before heading back to camp. Maybe he would start with the Rasengan training. He had brought some water balloons to start it during the breaks at the farm, but the construction of the fence had been more tiring than he had thought, and the flash assault on the bandit stronghold had left no time. About 4 dozen small animals had fallen for the traps, of them only 20 were still intact. A few early birds had met their ends by a well-placed shuriken, and their eggs would become part of the breakfast. He had been lucky enough to spot a deer. He was dragging the corpse back to the tents. He would skin it on the stream that was close to the clearing they stayed for the night. By the time he was done, Kurenai-sensei was starting another fire. Shino and Hinata were still inside their tents. What little sleep they had managed to catch would probably leave them soon. "How did you sleep, Naruto-kun?" Kurenai-sensei asked him. Silence was her answer. She sighed. "If it helps any, try to think what would have happened to them." She motioned to the fast asleep former captives. "Had you not done what you did?" Naruto's still red bangs shadowed his eyes. "But what good is it when I lose control like I did back there?" He growled. "Had anyone other than that scum," the last word was spit out of his mouth, "been there, I would have killed them too." A sob escaped him. "I could barely think straight. The only thing on my head was how to make them pay for what they had done." A tear fell from his eyes. "What good am I when I let my bloodlust control me?" For the first time since that fateful night when he met his tenants, Naruto cried for something other than happiness. The tears that were now flowing down his face were tears of frustration and self-loathing. Kurenai moved to embrace her student, holding him while he cried his frustrations away. It would help him. He had probably bottled up everything until now, showing nothing but that smile he wore inside the village. They would stay there for almost an hour, and even though they wouldn't realize it till months later, but that would be when Naruto started seeing Kurenai as a sister, rather than just his sensei. 2 hours later, Naruto was finally starting his Rasengan training. The past week he had finished every Fueton and Suiton technique he had copied from the Forbidden Scroll that elevated his jutsu arsenal to 8 Fueton and 14 Suiton. The spiraling sphere was just that, a sphere of pure chakra spinning so fast it looked as if though it was a whirlpool encased on a ball. The ultimate chakra form manipulation technique, and it was yet to be completed. The whole training was divided on 3 parts: control, power and shape. The first stage, control, was about popping a water balloon using your chakra to move the water inside it, move it to slow, and the balloon doesn't pop, move it to fast, and the only thing that happens is the balloon deforming. The whole point was to move it at the right speed on multiple directions. Kuzo. The problem was that this damn thing only breaks. It was hard to concentrate on both speed and direction. The stupid balloon just doesn't stay together long enough to pop to Bayo. That and Naruto had overloaded the balloons with water, so they were almost as big as his head instead of his fist, but he didn't know that. So frustrated, he went to his tent to meditate. There was only one problem, in the form of a little girl. Oh no, why are there 2 of you? 10 minutes earlier, Naruto's tent. She woke up feeling strangely well and in a soft place. That was the first sign something had gone either extremely right or extremely wrong. Last thing she remembered was getting tied up to the cross the shack she was in had, then she remembered pain, and then she passed out, so something had happened to her. Her breath hitched. Had she been beaten so bad she died? But, so you're awake? Her eyes snapped open and she looked to her right. I expected you to wake in the afternoon, though it's good you woke up now. The boy of 13 years, with red-orange hair, whiskers on his cheeks and purple eyes was staring at her, a tender smile on his face. He was holding something to her. "Here, eat this." She looked at it, fear and nervousness on her face. "Don't worry, it's food, meat." She eyed him. "Fine." Look, he took a bite of the animal he was holding and offered it to her again. "See, it's okay, if a bit dry." She warily took it and, with an almost excruciating amount of caution, took a bite. Immediately her face lit up and she dug in. 5 minutes later there were only bones left. Where am I?" she asked after finishing the rabbit, not that she knew what it was. Who are you?" Indeed, the boy had not introduced himself. Me? I'm Uzumaki Naruto Databayo. He introduced himself with a thumb up and a grin, the nice guy pose, and you're on my futon, in my tent, on a camp we made last night. Her expression changed from happy to confused, she had been on a camp before. Last night my team and I got into the bandit camp you were in and got you and the rest out. His voice broke her out of her thoughts. You were on a particularly bad shape, had to use most of the healing salve my teammate gave to me on you. He chuckled. I guess I should have used a bit less, you're almost as good as new. Thanks for helping me. The girl bowed. I don't think we could have gotten out of there on ourselves. Naruto grinned at her, a different grin from his introduction. That one had been a goofy one, this one was a proud one. No problem, I did got paid to do it. He frowned, not that I wouldn't have done anyway. She looked at the flap of the tent and saw a boy that looked identical to the one she was talking to. Oh no, why are there two of you? The Narutos looked at each other and back at her. I'm a clone, they said in perfect unison. She looked at them, bewildered. A clone? Yep, he is made out of my chakra. The redhead that just entered the tent continued, as if reading her thoughts. For all intents and purposes, we are pretty much the same. The original looked at his clone and said, you can dispel now, I'll take it from here. The clone did as told and disappeared on a puff of smoke. Well then, I don't suppose you have a name? Naruto smiled at her abashed expression. Megumi, my name is Megumi sir, she told him. Naruto frowned and said, don't call me sir, I'm at least 20 years too young to be a sir. He snorted. Whatever, do you want to go clean up? You're pretty dirty after all. At her nod he led her outside the tent and to the stream he had cleaned the deer on. 3 hours later, the large group was once again moving through the forests that formed the land of fire. Megumi was riding atop Naruto's shoulder, talking to him about how her life had been before her capture at the hands of the bandits. After she had washed away all the grime and dirt from her body, Naruto was able to get a clear look at her appearance. Her hair was a reddish black, mostly straight, though there were a few bangs that were curled. Her eyes were a deep shade of forest green. Her face was rounded, giving her a chubby look. Finally she was rather tall, he estimated that she was at least 2 or 3 inches taller than Konohamaru. They would reach the Leaf Village in the afternoon, around 6, and he would ask his Jiji for the adoption papers for Megumi. She would become his sister. Dates of Konoha 6:30 p.m. Izumo and Katetsu were assigned yet again to be on guard duty. Man, I'm bored. Katetsu sighed, it's so boring without Naruto. Too quiet. A snort came from his partner. Yeah, the Gaki always finds a way to make a boring day livelier. He looked at the gates. A large group was approaching. Leading was a boy with a younger kid on his shoulders, followed by a woman dressed with bandages. Holy, Izumo gasped, that's teammate right? Katetsu nodded, yes, Hokage-sama sent them to clear a bandit camp. He grimaced, bit early if you ask me, heard they didn't even had the exercises to make it easier. 10 minutes later, the large group of civilians were being led by a Jounin, while teammate +1 headed towards the Hokage tower. Hokage's office 6:30 p.m. Kurenai was giving the report of both their missions to the old man, who nodded at some points, frowned at others and chuckled at some more. He frowned a lot during the report of the bandit clearing. Off to the side were the young teens and the child. Naruto was behind the desk, showing the awestruck Megumi the sights that could be seen from there. He would take her to the Hokage monument later. Shino was talking with his bugs, asking what was that Naruto had unleashed at the bandit settlement. And Hinata was meekly staring at everywhere of the office, but nowhere close to the Hokage. Finally Kurenai's report was finished, and that's what happened. Hokage-sama. She bowed before stepping back, motioning for her students to stand with her. Very well, Sarutobi started, I trust you helped your genin handle their first kill, Kurenai. At her affirmative he continued, good, you and your team are being put on leave for the week, only 1D rank per day. He closed his eyes and thought, before snapping them open, also cut your training sessions in half, mostly concentrate on thing to get past the trauma. Kurenai nodded. You may leave now, Naruto you stay, I want to talk with you. The now redhead gulped, recognizing the voice of the old man as the voice of a leader, and not the one of a grandfather. Teammate left through the door, each sending the blonde their version of a concerned glance. Finally it was only him, Megumi, who was looking confused, and Sarutobi Hiruzen. What do you want to talk about, Jiji? The sweating blonde asked his grandfather. How are you faring, Naruto? The old man asked, ignoring the question. What you did was not something that would come easily for most men. I am surprised that you look as well as you do. Both your teammates were looking pale, Sarutobi told him, looking at him with harsh, yet kind, eyes. It was hard, Jiji, the whiskered boy confessed. I threw up just after IK killed. His breath hitched, but after spending some time with Sensei and Megumi I'm alright. The old man considered his words. He looked at the girl that was looking at the purple-eyed boy. Kurenai had said that Naruto had gone on a rampage after seeing her tied up and beaten, yet he could see that even after only a day the two were close, not like siblings yet, but what she felt was exactly what Konohamaru felt for the teen. Within a few weeks they would most likely be as close as whole-life brother and sister. Another thing I want to know is if you know what made you go into rampage at the camp. Kurenai told me she felt ki, the old man asked, but his voice dampened an answer. The boy looked sheepish and the slightest bit ashamed. It was the Kyuubi's Yaki. The old man narrowed his eyes. He had been sure the boy didn't know what the seal on his stomach contained. I met Kyuubi when I was 5. The aged Hokage didn't notice his slip. It was after I was kicked out of the orphanage. I was so exhausted that when I passed out I went to my mindscape. Megumi had fallen asleep now. Naruto was relieved about that. He would tell her when they were alone. He continued speaking before his grandfather could. After that day I started speaking with the fox. He kept me company and eventually we became friends more like brothers, but he didn't need to know that. Inside my mind I learned how to fend for myself, not exactly a lie. His mother had taught him. And when I started the academy he helped me get better control over my chakra, besides what you gave me and what I read. Sarutobi mused over the words of the teen opposite to him. The boy had known of his burden, yet he hadn't come to him. He supposed it was because he himself hadn't brought it up. Naruto had the habit of keeping things to himself unless completely necessary. Their eyes met and Hiruzen got the impression that the boy was still hiding something important, but what? You do realize that I could punish you for keeping a secret like that. The teen flinched. I won't, however, because it was supposed to be kept a secret. Sarutobi sighed, his age catching up a bit. They stayed in silence for a while, the only sound being the soft snores coming from Megumi. Finally Naruto spoke, Gigi, I was wondering if I could adopt her. His eyes were silently defying the Hokage to say no. The fire shadow rubbed his temples, he had expected this honestly. He looked at his surrogate grandson, he had that look, the look that said that he would not back down, no matter what. I must first tell you some things. The boy nodded, the look not disappearing. Adopting her will most likely mean that you will have to do at least one D-rank mission a day. This time an affirmative grunt accompanied the nod. You will have to expand your apartment. He was interrupted by Naruto, that's not a problem, you bought the whole top floor for me. Hiruzen nodded, he had forgotten that, and lastly, she needs a place to stay whenever you get out of the village for missions. He held a hand, halting the response, I know that you want to take her with you whenever you go on C ranks and higher, but you cannot. He looked at Naruto dead in the eyes. You may be an adult on the eyes of the law, and she would be your legal daughter, though he doubted the redhead would see it like that. It is forbidden to take a minor to any missions, even D ranks. Naruto scowled but nodded, he had expected that. He still didn't like it, but he had expected it. He would have to leave her with the Ichirakus during his trips outside the village. I understand, don't worry Hokage-sama. The old man looked surprised at the honorific, the boy had probably used it to get extra point with him. He handed the 13-year-old the adoption papers. 30 minutes and a clever use of the cage bunchen later, and Naruto left the tower with his sleeping daughter, leaving behind an old man smashing his head on the desk, muttering stupid. The next day Naruto's apartment. Naruto woke groggily the next day. Strangely enough his usually fast waking up cycle was incredibly slow that day. He stayed an odd amount of time in the land between asleep and awake. His head was throbbing for some reasons, and occasionally he would hear a shout of frustration or a sigh of disappointment inside his head. The seal was weakening again. In 2 days' time he would be able to communicate freely with his Kachan and Kurama. He suddenly noticed how heavy his chest felt, as it though he had forgotten to deactivate his weight seals for the night, but he knew that was not the case. Slowly he looked down from the roof and smiled when he took in the scene. Megumi, now Uzumaki Megumi, had sometime during the night found her way to his chest, curling around herself and snuggling into him with a happy and serene smile on her face. He gently moved from the bed, careful to not wake her up, and went about his normal routine. Exercise, a shower and preparing breakfast, which from now on would be for 2. He would have to find a way to make the Chiseo bunchen less exhausting, to make it every time he left the village for more than a month. He wouldn't want to leave Megumi for herself, even if he did trust the Ichiraku with everything. After all, they were family and all but blood. 2 hours later the redhead was finishing preparing a normal breakfast, boiled rice, sunny side up eggs and bacon. If only he could eat ramen for breakfast. A noise from the bedroom drew his attention away from the eggs. Megumi had woken up and was rubbing the sleep out of her eyes. Come Megumi-chan, food's ready he told her, and she sleepily made her way to the table. They ate in silence, the 9-year-old occasionally nodding off, before catching herself and shaking her head in an attempt to get the sleepiness out of her system. Hey Megumi-chan, get ready, we're going to have a busy day, the girl groaned, why couldn't they just sleep? That would be the perfect day, stay in a soft surface and sleep the day away. Her thoughts were interrupted however, as the teen continued talking, I have to show around, where you can find me, where you'll study, the best place for eating in town, where the parks are. He looked at her and saw that her eyes had lit up at the mentions of parks. Time for the finisher, you could even make some friends, you know, for when I have to leave, but if you want to stay here, alone. Before he finished talking the girl was already heading for the corridor, searching for the bathroom to take a shower. He sighed, well it was true that he would show her around, he would have to take her shopping, which meant entering the merchant district. Well there were many shops that accepted him, if just for business, they all overpriced him. Only 2 clothing shops did not overcharge him, and one of them was for ninja clothing. The problem with the other was that its products were meant for more age targets, those that had just reached adulthood and onwards. As much as he didn't like it, he would have to give AM-chan the money for her to take Megumi-chan shopping, unnoticed by him. His wallet, Gama-chan, shed a tear, which soon turned into full crying. Ichiraku's 2:30 p.m. The chef and his daughter were preparing the food for Konoha's rush hour. Many people would start to fill the small stand, and those would be the easy ones to deal with. The problem resided within a single teenage boy who would soon come for his daily feed of ramen, a meal that would probably fill a medium family. True enough, their main source of income came into the stand, and he wasn't alone. Aheo, AM-chan, Tuchi-oji, there was a little girl by his side. "Hello Naruto-kun, you haven't come in a while," AM greeted him, a slight warning in her tone. "Ah, well, you see, I had a mission out of the village, and, the smile on her face was scary, and this was from a kid that had faced dead by pranked Anbu on multiple cases." Tuchi meanwhile looked amused at the boy trying to calm his daughter down. It warmed his heart that even after his not so good early years the boy could function properly. His eyes moved to the girl that was hiding behind the red head. "She was probably no older than 9, he noted, "and who might you be?" His question brought AM's attention from the redhead to the dark-haired girl that looked nervous. Naruto sighed on relief, he had evaded a blade there. "This is Megumi-chan, found her on the way back to the village," he smiled. "She's living with me now." The brown-haired teen raised her eyebrow. "Really?" The girl nodded shyly. "Well then I suppose we convert you to a ramen follower." Megumi looked at Naruto confused. What the hell was a ramen follower? "That's right, I brought her so she could taste your awesome ramen databao," he exclaimed. The aged chef smiled. "Well then, your first 2 plates are on the house." He took his notepad. "What will you have?" "The usual Oji-san," Naruto replied. "I wanted beef ramen," Megumi ordered. Humming up, Tuchi left to the kitchens. AM-chan, the 15-year-old, looked at Naruto. "I was wondering if you would like to come shopping." The brown-haired teen smirked. "Why Naruto-kun, are you asking me on a date?" She held back a grin when he saw the boy blush and sputter. Naruto, however, was embarrassed, and the innocent front AM was putting definitely didn't help. It's not like that, Tabeo," he shouted. "Megumi needs to go shopping and will need advice." Megumi looked in shock, he was going to let her buy what she wanted. The innocent expression turned into a sad one, a pout dominating AM's face. "So Naruto doesn't think I'm pretty, I'm gonna cry." The trembling lip was a nice touch. "Ah, please don't cry AM-chan, you're pretty, just don't cry." "Ah," so easy it was to tease the boy. Gucci's voice cut into the conversation. "AM, stop teasing Naruto and go with him, he will probably need help in the stores." AM was sporting a real pout now. Really, why couldn't she have fun with the boy? It was funny to see him riled up. The rest of the meal was spent on lighter note, and after 3 bowls for Megumi, her conversion to the ramen was successful, and the usual dozen for Naruto. Him, AM and Megumi left for the shopping area. Naruto's apartment. Nighttime. A smiling Megumi and a crying Naruto entered the apartment. The predictions of Gama-chan had been proven right, she was almost as skinny as when she was new. They had hit the stores at 4 and kept jumping from shop to shop all throughout the evening. A full wardrobe, a bed for when the expansion was complete, groceries, toys and a fox plushie had been bought, resulting on him being broke at the moment. Luckily he had resupplied his equipment the last week. He made his way to bed after putting everything away, changing to his PJs, Megumi doing the same. The last thing he saw before falling asleep was the small body taking her place at his chest. Konoha's training ground 8 1 week later. It was a beautiful day in Konohagakure no Sado. The sun was bright, the animals lively, and the children were playing outside, laughing and having fun. "Yada, I finally managed it, Databao." The hero of this story was on his team's training ground. During the past week Naruto had been trying master the first step of the Rasengan to an acceptable level, that level being popping the balloon in less than 10 seconds. "Good job Saki, you can start on the second tomorrow." The seal had also gotten back to normal, allowing him to communicate with Kushina and Kurama. He still shivered whenever he remembered the additional training his mother had put him through. She had driven him to the ground in her anger at him losing control. "Wow, Ani-chan, that's awesome." Megumi had started to see him as a brother, which made him ecstatic the first time she called him that. "Yeah Bosu, nah, can we do it too?" Konohamaru started to follow him every once in a while, hoping for a bit of learning that would be given. "It would be so cool if we could." With Kono had come a friend of his, Mogi, a girl with V-shaped orange pigtails, a red top and tan pants. The 3 of they would later be known as the Konoha Corps, but that is a story for another time. Naruto smiled, happy that they were as eager to learn as he was when he was younger. "I can't teach it to you yet," he told them. "I have to master it myself first." He chuckled at their downtrodden looks, "although I think I can teach you something." Their face did a complete 180 from disappointed to eager. Was he like that whenever his Kachan taught him something new? "Yes you were, you would jump in place for 10 minutes before I taught you the theory part of a jutsu." "Forget," he asked then. "Did you really have to ruin the moment?" He scowled. "I love you too Saki, forget it." "Hey, Bosu, are you okay?" Right, he had some brats to teach. No, no, don't worry Mogi-chan, he cleared his throat. I'm going to teach you the henge no jutsu. He looked at the time. He had 1 hour before the mission time. I'm just going to tell you the theory behind it. I'll have to leave soon. The henge, or transformation, is one of the easiest yet most useful techniques there is. The reason it's a basic. The one you will learn in the academy is a jinjutsu. It makes your chakra fool anyone looking at you to think you are another person or you have a different build. The main problem with it is that if you transform into something that is bigger or smaller than you, the illusion will be easier to notice, or if you touch something it will dispel. Konohamaru raised his arm. Doesn't that make it useless? I mean, if it can break so easily then it can't be as useful as you say, he asked, and the redhead nodded in agreement. Indeed, but it is good for academy to teach, because it doesn't require big chakra reserves, he smirked, but it is useless in the field, which is why I'm teaching you a variation, a better one, the Shin no Henka no Jutsu, the true change technique. It works much like my cage bunshin. It creates a shell of chakra, but instead of making a different thinking entity, it molds around you in the form you want. This has disadvantages too. You can't become something smaller, only bigger. Your equilibrium is severely damaged if you change your shape too much. I'll be honest, the 3 of you can cast it, but only Kono would be able to hold it for more than 5 minutes, and it will leave you all exhausted after doing it. I don't want you to do it without me watching, too dangerous for your health, and after you managed it for the first time I'll have you do exercises for you to increase your reserves. He looked at his watch, 10 minutes before he had to report. Now come on, we're heading back to the village. The trip back was spent explaining the many uses of the technique he would teach them. Hokage's office. Sarutobi Hiruzen was a patient man, a direct result of his old age. He had lived through wars, and while he was still a warrior at heart, he would always prefer the peaceful approach to the problems that threatened the village. He often saw young people leave the safety of the walls of Konoha in a quest for the fame that being a ninja could bring. Some of them made it past their 30s, most of them did not get past 25 without a scar to mark the turning point of their lives. He would often wonder if it was right, sending children and teenagers to kill bandits. It would scar them in the deepest part of their hearts, but such was the way of the shinobi. 2 days ago he had sent a team of young prospects to a country in need of help. Team 7 was that team. They had encountered more than what they had expected and were now requesting backup. The scene teammates saw when they entered the office was that of grim old man, eyes made of steel. It was a scene that made the usually happy Naruto stand attentive at what his leader would tell them to do. After a few seconds, in which the Hokage looked at each of them in the eye, he spoke. Teammate, yesterday a messenger summon came to me with a message from the captain of Team 7. He paused, daring anyone to interrupt. In the message was a request for backup. Kurenai's ruby-colored eyes widened. They came across missing nins on the way to Nami no Kuni, the country they were supposed to take their client to. Nami no Kuni. If what his Kachan was telling him was right, Naruto could go to the destroyed land of Yuzu after the mission. This made the ranking of the mission jump from a C rank to a possible A rank. He held a hand up, halting the response from the sensei in the room. I would have sent a Chunin team, but the only ones available are loner ones that recently got promoted and are preparing for their own assignments. He sighed. What he would do was hard for him. Teammate, you are to go to the rendezvous point on Nami and help Squad 7 in their mission. Dismissed. He slid a scroll across the desk before turning his seat around, showing that no arguments would be heard. Kurenai closed her eyes. Couldn't they have a normal mission for once? Meet me at the gates in half an hour. I'm leaving whether or not you're there. But that said, she left the room, her students following some ways behind. Southern Gates. 20 minutes later, Naruto arrived last of the group, a note in his hand that was addressed to Hakuchiji. Kurenai had arrived 10 minutes after being dismissed, having taken a pack that was pre-made for this kind of things. The Nada had arrived 5 minutes after. One of the storage scrolls Naruto had given her was filled with healing materials and first aid kits. Shino arrived shortly after her, with a pack full of insect tanks and scrolls with provisions and clothes. Naruto, like always, had sealed everything he would take on various scrolls, sealed in turn on his master scroll. He had taken Megumi to the Ichirakus. She would stay with him during his time outside the village. Hopefully he would find the Uzumaki nin Fuinjutsu notes to make the Chiseo Bunshin a more viable option. Before leaving, I will tell you that this is going to be a very big exemption to the rank range rules, and it will most likely not be repeated, Kurenai told her team, who nodded in agreement. Good, now come on. Naruto looked down to his hand. Katetsu, the man, looked up from his game of solitaire. Could you send this to the Hokage as soon as you can no longer see us? He handed the bemused man the note he had written. Sure Naruto, but why not give it to him in person? He was confused really. Messages to the Hokage were usually sent during mission, not before them. Because I don't think he will like what I will do now. That was new. Naruto disobeying the fire shadow. Before he could speak his thought, however, Naruto left to catch up with the rest of his team, leaving the eternal Chunin to contemplate the note. What could Naruto say that would displease the Hokage so much that he had to write a card explaining what he would do? I wasn't Naruto's style. He normally did as he pleased as long as it was within the law, going as far as to find loopholes in the Konoha charter. There was something going on, and the only way to find out was to pass the card to the village leader. Hokage's office 10 minutes later. Slam Hiruzen slammed both fists on his desk, making it snap in two. 5 minutes ago, one of the chunin assigned to guard duty had barged into his office carrying a note from his surrogate grandson. Said note had something he had not expected to hear, that Naruto held way more secrets than what he had thought. GG. I'm writing this because I don't think I can say it to your face. I know you don't like me stepping too much out of the line, but what'll do is something that must be done. I can't let you stop me. Digi, I have many secrets that I don't want to reveal, secrets that I can't reveal to you yet, this is one of them. I wanted to tell you this in person and on a later date, but it cannot wait anymore. I know who my mother is, I know where my family is from, I'm going to visit my country after this mission is done. It's something I must do to finally give closure to the defeat of Yuzu. I know why you hid it from me. To prevent me from being prosecuted by the people who would want the Uzumaki bloodline. I don't blame you, I would have done it slightly different though. I still don't know who my father is, so that is still a secret kept from me. Again, I know why you're hiding it. I will probably come back with the remaining Uzumaki archives, the ones that survived the Kumo-Iwa invasion. So please keep the civilians off my back when I get back. If you could buy me the rest of the complex I live in, it would be appreciated. Just take it out of half the share I get from all the missions I do from now on. I will explain how I know of my heritage get back, for if you want to know. Just please, don't try to pry too much into me, there are some things that I want to take with me to the grave. I hope you aren't too mad at me for keeping secrets, but you know what would happen if some thongs got out in the open. Don't worry, Uzumaki Naruto. Needless to say, Hiruzen was frustrated. Naruto had somehow managed to hide knowledge like that from him, something deemed impossible by many. Not only that, but who know what else he knew, it could be something as small as the names of all his genin, to something as serious as the patrol routes and schedules. He would interrogate that boy when he came back, and damn if he wasn't going to be harsh. Wave country, Kakashi threw himself at his students and client, sending them all to the ground. Unki stood up and looked behind, to the giant cleaver that had embedded itself on the trunk of a tree. Well, what do we have here? The rough voice brought the attention of everyone to the handle of the massive sword, Sharingan no Kakashi. No wonder the Onigimdai fell their attempt. A high-end A-rank ninja wouldn't be taken down by two lower B-rank ones. The man standing there scoffed. I hope you can give me a good fight, otherwise I'll just kill the old man hiding behind your brats. Momochi's abuser haddock narrowed his eye. He would need some lucky shots against that cleaver of him. I should have expected it. You became a mercenary after your failed coup. The man, Momochi's abuser, was a few years younger than Kakashi, with black hair and eyes, and the lower part of his face covered by bandages, and only wearing a pair of grey pants, apart from some camouflaged leg and arm warmers. He jumped down, dislodging the cleaver on his way down. I suppose I'm well known because of that, but you forget the reason Kiri is now on civil war. Kakashi's eye narrowed even more. News of a blood rebellion had been traveling across the elemental nations, and the man he was staring at was the cause. The eyebrowless man chuckled. I assume that you won't hand the drunken man over. Kakashi moving into a stance was his answer. I see, well then, his hands moved into a sign, Kurigakur no Jutsu. Instantly, the mist around them became thick and heavy, reducing the sight of Team 7 to a meager range. Sasuke, Sakura and Kiba moved closer to Tazuna, each with a kunai at the ready. The killing intent washed over them, paralyzing them in place. Sasuke was pretty sure that Tazuna was close to passing out and that Sakura was about to lose control of her bowels. He himself was only holding up because of that day. There are 8 places where even a glancing blow can be fatal. Zabuza's voice came from everywhere yet nowhere. The larynx, the spine, the lungs, the liver, the jugular vein, the subclavian artery, the kidneys, and the heart. The Kai multiplied. Where should I strike first? The copycat cursed when he looked at his students. They were stiff with fear. Don't worry guys, the faces of the youngsters snapped to him. As long as I am here nothing can happen to you. He moved his headband fully to his forehead, uncovering a red eye with 3 Tama markings, which made Sasuke gasp. Touching words, but can you keep them? A voice whispered in his ear before he felt cold metal at his throat. I wouldn't cocky if I were you. Zabuza. A blade touched the neck of the missing nin. You're not the only one that can use water release. You know the Kakashi Zabuza was holding turned into water. So you copied my Mizu Bunshin after seeing once. Once again a blade was pressed to Haddock's throat and he stabbed man in front of him, turning him to water. But I expected that. A fight against the famed Sharingan is impossible to win if you don't think ahead. Kakashi kicked backwards, making Zabuza step back and giving him room to maneuver. He spun the knife around, changing the grip, and moved to engage the ex-Kiri Anbu in close range. He ducked under a swipe from the massive sword, only to roll away from a slash that made the cleaver dig onto the ground. He moved fast and slipped under the guard of the bulkier man, making several attempts at slashing that were either dodged or blocked by the handle of the Zanbatsu dot. Zabuza smirked under his bandages after an overextended slash. He spun around, bringing the dull side of his Kubikirabacho against Kakashi, sending the Konohan into the pond at the side of the clearing, where he sank under the surface. He had gotten him into his trap. The white-haired man shot up from the water, sending chakra to the water so he could use it as a handhold. Any second spent on the water was a second spent on enemy territory. Why is the water so heavy? It's almost as if it were his eyes wide and charged with chakra. And I win, Kakashi. Too bad you didn't give much fight. It would have been a thrill if you did. Zabuza ran to where the copy nin was halfway in the water. Making hand signs, he called for one of his few capture jutsus, Suiton. Suro no Jutsu, and so, Hada Kakashi had been trapped. Hada Kakashi was in trouble, and he knew it. He had requested a C-rank mission in order to give his students a wake-up call. They were good kids, but arrogant, the brooding boy that went along on his family's fame, the feral boy that had too much confidence on his strength, and the girl that worried about training only the necessary and not enough to improve in the areas she was talented in. Their growth rate had been slower than that of most genin because of that, yet they were still on the higher end of the rookies, at least the male were. During the trip that would take them to the country their client had lived in, they had encountered missing ninjas from Kurigakure no Sato, so he requested backup before continuing on. After the sob story the drunken architect had given him, he just couldn't abandon him. Now, here he was, trapped inside a Suro no Jutsu, watching as his students fought the Kurigakure no Kijin alone. Uchiha Sasuke was scared witless for the second time of his short life. The first time had been when his brother had gone mad and killed the whole Uchiha clan, before proceeding to make him watch the massacre inside a Jinjutsu. The reason he had accepted to continue the mission had been because he wanted to test his strength with a chunin that was already aware of his abilities, so he could officially consider himself a C2B rank shinobi, and while he thought that fighting a jonin was worth it, he was beginning to regret that decision. The killing intent the monster in front of him released had paralyzed him on sheer terror. His knees were buckling, his hands sweating and his head clouded. And now that his sensei was trapped in that weird water ball, he had little to no chance of getting out of there alive if the backup didn't arrive. And Yuzuka Kiba felt, for the fourth time of his life, as if the Shinigami was hot on his heels. The first time was when he had insulted that crazy woman his sister hung around with, the second when he got lost on the wood and entered the territory of a tiger. The last time he had felt like that was when he taunted the Uzumaki with insults thrown at the boy's mother. He had been on the hospital for a week after that. Right now though, he was wishing to go back to those simpler times, when the only thing he had to worry about was how Akamaru was growing and how badly had he done at the academy. The main problem was that he didn't, no one on their team really, know how to repel killing intent, and they could only ignore so much before it got unbearable. He, like the rest of his team, could only hope the backup their sensei had requested got here soon. Baruno Sakura had been raised by a civilian merchant that had established in Konoha. Her mother was part of the Merchants Guild, and her father worked in one of the many clothing shops that were strewn about in the village. That being said, she had joined the ninja ranks because of the glamour she thought it would bring. Never had she expected that she could die because of a severe case of misinformation at the hands of an old man. She had thought that whatever her sensei gave to her would be enough to get her to chunin, and never even considered to seek someone to expand on her great grasp at chakra control or chakra-induced strength. But she would start seeking advice and training from other sources if they got out of this situation alive. Lamachi Zabuza had lived a rather bloody life. His childhood on the Bloody Mist had been one of the many things that had broken him and turned him into the man he was now. A monster that always loved to spill the blood of those who opposed him on his goals. At the age of 9 he had been forced to kill his best friend on a battle stage by his academy, an act that left him so scarred that he proceeded to kill everyone so that none that came after him would have to do it again. When he was a jonin he had found a girl on the streets, a girl that would later become his first apprentice and part of his legacy, even if he thought she was too gentle. 3 weeks later another kid, this time a boy, would become attached to him too, making him his second apprentice and the second part of his testament. When he joined the Kurigakure no Shichinen Sho he protected the village he had been born in because of a sense of obligation, rather than want. He had become delusioned with the path his hometown was taking. By the time the Kagaya attacked Kiri, he was so hopeless in it that he ran away with his apprentice and left to wait till such time that it became the great village it once was. He had always liked the thrill of the battle, the adrenaline pumping and the senses overloading. He had been ecstatic when he saw that Hada Kakashi would be his rival for the battle, a ninja of his reputation would be the experience of a lifetime. He knew that Haddock would find a way to break out of his water prison, but until then, why not have some fun? He made a mile into the sea from Waves Beach. Sensei Naruto's whisper broke through the silence of their boat ride. What's the plan when we get there? Do we set our own camp or search for the other team? Kurenai thought on the question. It was a valid one, she supposed, set a camp before nightfall, or find the team that had requested backup as soon as they arrived. Both had its merits. On one hand they could arrive fast, but not at a 100%, on the other they could rest for the night and help during the next day, when they were at the top of their current capabilities. She sighed, "We'll look for Kakashi's team as soon as we land. If they are on battle, I'm sure they'll appreciate the help." Her team nodded. "Ayano, sensei," Hinata whispered, her Byakugan active. "There is a lot of chakra being released inland." She looked at Kurenai, "Most of it is channeled to the mist around a pond." They were landing now. The boatman nodded at them before setting off into the mist around the island. "We're moving fast. If I'm right, they need help now more than ever." She looked at her team's juggernaut. "Prepare your weapons, Naruto. We can't afford to hold back." The boy nodded, and the team leapt across the forest, intent on aiding their comrades. Back with Team 7. Sasuke was desperate now. They would have to fight until whoever was coming arrived. If they ever did. A glance at his wild teammate sent the thought across. "We need to fight, dog boy," the Uchiha told him. "Hopefully we can release sensei and he'll finish Zabuza off." Iba nodded, still scared, speechless, but aware enough to know what would happen if they didn't fight. Sasuke ran at the water clones that had sprung from poodles on the grass, intent on taking some of them out. Iba had Akamaru transform into him so the two of them could fight together, as true Yazukas would. The clone of the dozen engaged on a taijutsu battle with Sasuke. The boy dodged, ducked and rolled out of the massive sword's way. He tried to get punches in whenever an opening presented itself, but whenever he tried it the attack was quickly countered and a bruise would form. He kicked after standing up from a duck under a swing that left the clone open at the chest. The clone took a step back, dazed from the kick, which allowed the Uchiha to stab it in the lung. Iba swiped at the clone he was currently fighting, retracting his arm quickly and jumping aside a vertical slash. Akamaru spun from behind the clone and did a roundhouse. The clone blocked the strike with its forearm, grabbing the offending limb and swinging in an arch, making boy and beast clone crash into one another. Righting themselves they shouted Gitsuga and barreled into the clone from the back and the front, managing to dispel it from the hit. "Page Bunshin no Jutsu." A voice familiar to those from Konoha brought a smile of relief to their faces. 5 of the remaining clones were stabbed at a part of their body, making them nothing but poodles on the ground. One was disrupted by a palm strike to the heart, rendering it useless. 2 were shrouded by insects that sucked the chakra out of them, making them just water. The last 2 fell to a kunai to the throat. 4 people dropped to the ground, all of them on guard and staring at the demon of the mist. "Hinata, Shino, stay with the client." Kurenai spoke with the voice of the leader. "Naruto, is it only us around?" Naruto crouched and put his palm to the floor. He closed his eyes, and his hand glowed blue. "Yes, I think some animals are running away, but yes," the purple-eyed redhead answered, getting into stance again. Zabuza meanwhile was having a mental struggle. "Damn, more brats and a woman, at least they look competent." His eyes narrowed when the red-eyed woman started making hand signs he didn't recognize. "Ninjutsu?" "Zenshin Fusui no Jutsu," Kurenai spoke, and the bandaged man felt his arms and legs lose mobility. The demon of the mist tried in vain to move, not succeeding on any of his attempts. He had one option, one that would leave him with an uphill battle: interrupt his chakra flow and release Haddock. "I admit you were smart at requesting reinforcements, Kakashi." He slowly moved his chakra inward. A flare of his chakra would make his students come. "Still, better for me." More food to feed the demon. With a grunt all of his pent-up chakra was released, making the younger Konohinin gasp as it hit them. Fubakiraboucho was on the move as soon as Zabuza's mobility was back, attempting to behead the still dizzy white-haired man, but the attack was blocked by a reinforced kunai. "Nice save, Kurenai," the copy nin panted out. "You could have gotten here a bit earlier though. I was about to lose consciousness." His eyes moved from the Jinjutsu mistress towards the swordsman. "How about we finish this?" he asked with an air of nonchalance. He dodged under a swipe and aimed a punch at the stomach of his opponent. The punch was grabbed, as was the counter-attack with the flat side of the sword. Both Jonin jumped back and started moving in zigzags patterns, clashing blades whenever they met at the center of their trajectory. They ran back, making the same hand seals at the same time. "How's copying me?" Zabuza asked himself. "It's like he can see what'll do." "That's your thinking, right?" His thoughts were interrupted by Kakashi. "It must be that eye of his. I'm starting to get pissed off." "Stop finishing my sentences, Suiton." "Suryudan no Jutsu," they chanted at the same time, clapping their hands together. 2 dragons rose out of the water, circling around each other, snapping bites at the other, before rearing back, roaring and crashed head-on into the other, raining water over the 6 genin and single jonin watching. Zabuza glared into Kakashi's eyes. "I am starting to hate that bloody monkey." Once again they started making hand seals, but unnoticed by everyone was the fact that Kurenai was doing them too. "Take me no Jutsu," she whispered, planting the illusion on Zabuza. Said monster looked up from the feet of his opponent to his face, to see himself in the place where Haddock should be. "What? How? Am I looking at a mirror?" The monetary pause was what Kakashi needed to finish his chain before Zabuza did. "Suiton. Daibakufu no Jutsu," he shouted. A large wall of water formed in front of the copycat, making Zabuza still with shock. The wall then rushed forward, taking the Kijin with it and slamming the man into a tree. Zabuza, your future has been decided. The downed man looked at Kakashi, the Shinigami awaits your arrival. Just as Kakashi was about to thrust his kunai into Zabuza's chest, two senbon pierced the man's neck, making his eyes widen, before he fell forward. Thank you Konoha Shinobi. A voice brought the attention of the group towards a tree. Two figures were standing on a branch. My partner and I have been hunting him for a while. Now the one that spoke was certainly more feminine, but both had Rimshin-in masks from Kiryu, hiding their faces. The more masculine of the two jumped down from his perch and spoke in a hard tone, we'll be taking him now. Mizukage-sama has been asking for his corpse for a while now. He picked the body up, then you again for letting us get the drop on him, and both hunters disappeared. It would be Naruto that broke the silence that ensued. That was rather anticlimactic, wasn't it? Everyone nodded in agreement. The guards were dropped eventually. Kakashi covered his Sharingan, Naruto let his talons disappear, Akamaru transformed back, and Hinata deactivated her Byakugan. Kakashi spoke in between panting breaths, again Kurenai, thank you for the help, I think the battle would have been drawn out if you hadn't arrived. Kurenai rolled her eyes, Kakashi's lone eye was straying around her body, save it Kakashi, she told him. The bridge builder scratched his neck and spoke to the ninjas, I'll be taking you to my home now. The kids nodded, it's about a mile away, so we shouldn't take long. Kakashi nodded, though his eye was becoming half-lidded, lead the way then he managed to say before he went to blissful unconsciousness. He was cashed by Naruto, who deactivated his weights. The boy grunted under the weight and noticed the worried look sent his way. Don't worry, he's got chakra exhaustion, nothing that doesn't go away with a good meal and a lot of sleep, he told Team 7, before muttering to himself, I should know, bloody Uzumaki training. Kurenai cleared her throat, if we could get going to Zuna-san. The man nodded and set off, everyone following after him. Nami no Kuni evening. The entourage was standing in front of a rather humble house at the edge of the ocean. It had 2 stories and was rather traditional. Azuna knocked on the door. It was answered by a woman in her late 20s, with straight black hair, fair skin and dark eyes. Her eyes widened at seeing Azuna, with a cry of Atausen she launched herself to the old man, making him take a step back to keep from falling over. She noticed the large group behind her father and stood back. Who are they, father? She asked the builder. Azuna grinned, they are the super ninjas that got me here. He turned to the sweat-dropping group, everyone, this is my daughter, Tsunami. Tsunami seemed surprised before she bowed to them, thank you for bringing my father back, she told them. The group looked confused at the woman, and everyone had different reactions, 2 of them being Naruto scratching the back of his head and Hinata blushing, but that was usual for them. Kurenai, as the only responsible adult awake, took charge of the situation. It was nothing, Tsunami-san, she told the bowing woman, who straightened herself, would you be so kind as to direct my student, she motioned to Naruto, who adjusted Kakashi, to a room where he could put my partner. She waved them all inside, of course, please come in, she guided them to the stairs, Inari, come to greet our guests. The boy, no older than 8, came down the stairs, looked at them with disdain, and ran to hug his grandfather, Aji-san, it's good to have you back, he spoke from within the embrace. The drunken builder smiled at the kid, it's good to see you too, Inari, he pointed at the shinobi gathered at the small living room. The disdain was once again the main emotion seen on the boy's face, completely a 180 from the affection shown to his grandpa. They're going to die within the week following the statement. He ran up the stairs, ignoring the shouts from his mother. Tsunami sighed at her son, sorry about him, he has been like that for a while now, she apologized. Unnoticed by his sensei, Naruto made a mocking face pointed at the roof, meant for the kid closed inside his room, making the genin present snicker. Don't worry Tsunami-san, Kurenai told the woman, now, if you could tell Naruto where to put the man he's carrying, she let the sentence hang. Tsunami shook her head, yes, I only have 2 rooms, so pick one of the doors on the left side of the corridor upstairs. Naruto nodded and adjusting haddock once again, started climbing the stairs. He ignored the sniffling coming from one of the rooms, unsealed one of the bedrolls inside his arm and set the unconscious man down. When do you think he'll be up, Ka-chan? He asked as he inspected the room. Kushina hummed in thought, knowing Kakashi, he's going to awaken tomorrow and be at his top in a week. Naruto felt his eyes widen in surprise, you know him? He sent. Kushina cursed quietly, she hadn't planned to let that slip. Now how to answer without giving away Minato's identity as his father. He was constantly sent on a lot missions with your father during the last war, that was as much as she could give without telling him, and he befriended him during his youth. Do you think he could tell me stories about Toussaint? He asked, he really wanted to know his father better, even if his Aka-san couldn't tell him who he was. Kushina considered his question. It couldn't hurt, hearing someone's opinion, one that wasn't hers, sure, but remember, you can't know his name until you're at least. She was cut off by an annoyed Naruto, Takubetsu Jonin, so I can defend myself in case it gets out, and his enemies come to get me. She had told him this every time he asked when he was younger. He probably knew the ensuing rant that would follow if he hadn't interrupted by heart. When Kushina was about to retort, Naruto was called downstairs by his sensei, effectively cutting off the discussion. He ran down the stairs, jumping over the last 3 steps. He vaulted over the back of the couch and sat himself between his teammates. "This is a nice place to bayo," he told Hinata, who blushed at closeness. Kurenai face-palmed at his student. Really, why couldn't he keep his seriousness outside of battle? She looked at the genin of Team 7, who were seated on the somewhat smaller sofa. "Kids, I'm going to be in charge until your sensei wakes up," she told them. "What was the last thing he showed you?" Sasuke looked at his teammates before answering. "He told us that we mastered the tree walking last week. We've been at it so it's more natural." Sakura added something of her own. "He wanted to teach me a genjutsu this week. It would be the 3rd. Kurenai nodded. She had suspected that. The girl had small reserves and good control. Still, she would have to get out of the fangirl phase. She had been staring at the Uchiha for a while now. Biba spoke when the woman looked at him. "He has been helping me improve my speed for my taijutsu." Kurenai nodded again. It was more than what she had expected. Honestly, the man was so lazy and laid back that she was sure he would have let them train on their own after improving what he believed was more important than anything. "Has he tested your natures yet?" She wasn't expecting a positive answer. She herself hadn't tested her students, though she was going to do it if the mission hadn't interfered. The only reason Naruto knew his was because he had had trouble with the normal Bunshin. Sakura and Kiba assumed curious expression and shook their heads, while Sasuke only grunted in response. "Naruto," she called to her hyper student, who looked up from his discussion with Shino, "do you have some special paper inside your seals?" The boy looked confused before his face lit up with understanding and he nodded. "How many?" Team 7, Hinata, Shino and the civilians present looked on in confusion as Naruto's face screwed up in thought. While he crossed his arms and looked at the tattoos on them. Finally he sighed. I think I have 3, maybe 4, he told her, shaking his head. "I was going to give them to you, sensei, but it slipped my mind," he admitted sheepishly. The red-eyed woman sighed at her student, once again questioning his mental capacity. She shook those thoughts off. Someone that could prank the Anbu was by no means an idiot, especially if he did it repeatedly. "I'll have to ask the hentai if he has some," then she muttered. She turned so she could look at everyone present. "I believe we should go unpack. Tsunami-san, Tazuna-san, call any of us if you need help." The civilians nodded and the young genins followed upstairs, the boys entering the bigger of the 2 rooms and the girls the smaller one. Dining room 8:50 p.m. There wasn't anything noteworthy for diner. It was tasty, as most homemade food was, but because the whole Gedo had over the country, everything was half spoiled. It was a silent affair, the only noise coming from cutlery scrapping the plates, with the occasional rustling from someone shifting his position. The portions were small, only enough to fill them, but not enough to leave them with a rounded belly. Sakura felt her vision wander sometime after she finished her meal. Her eyes settled over a piece of furniture with photos on top of it. The particular one caught her interest, one that seemed to be missing something, as if a part of it had been "Excuse me, Tsunami-san, but why is that picture ripped?" She pointed at it. The atmosphere of comfortable silence changed into an awkward, and Sakura found herself regretting asking the question. Inari slid his chair back and stood up, quickly storming up the stairs. Tazuna lowered his head and gripped the edge of the table, while Tsunami covered her mouth and tried not to let tears fall. Tazuna spoke lowly but clearly, and nobody missed a word. The part that was taken off had the hero of the country in it. Sensing, rather than seeing the questioning looks on the faces of the shinobi present, he looked up, as if remembering something. He was an important person all over the island. Inari met him when he was 5, some bullies had thrown a puppy Inari owned into the sea to see him cry. He threw himself at the water without thinking about the fact that he didn't know how to swim. The puppy did know how to swim, it just didn't remember because of the shock. It swam to the beach, dried itself and walked away. It was young and hadn't formed a strong bond with Inari. Inari watched in despair, he struggled as more and more water entered his mouth. Eventually his forces left him and he almost drowned. At this point the women gasped and the boys grimaced in sympathy. The old man ignored the reactions and continued the story. He was rescued by Kaiza, a fisherman that happened to be passing by. The man saw bubbles coming to the surface and threw himself to the water. Kaiza set up a fire and laid the, at the time, unconscious Inari near it so the boy could dry. He also used it to cook some fishes he had managed to catch. When Inari came to, he saw the man giving him a smile and offering him an impaled fish. They talked for the most part of the afternoon until Inari came home, dragging Kaiza behind him. We invited him to come inside, have dinner with us. Before we realized it, he had settled himself as a permanent resident and married Tsunami. Said woman was now silently sobbing, yet Tazuna paid her no mind and stared at nothing. He taught Inari his philosophy. To protect everything precious to him, no matter the cost. He also taught the boy to hunt and to fish, so he could provide to his family when Kaiza retired. Kaiza was started to be called the hero of Wave when he saved the village nearby from a flood. The wood dam that kept the water from the town had become undone during a hurricane. Nobody wanted to risk their lives, so they called Kaiza, who was one of the strongest people at the time. Kaiza rushed to the place of the dam and threw himself to the overflowing river. He fought the current, grabbed the cable that secured the door and secured it again, saving the villagers from drowning. From that day forward he could be seen helping people out and teaching children at plazas. The citizens adored him, welcomed him wherever he went. It all went to hell when Gato came. He promised us prosperity, progress and most of all, a place on the map. Yet the only thing he did was buy property. He put taxes over everything he owned. Stores, houses, hotels, tea shops, even the ports were overtaken and bankrupted. Few people had hoped that Gato would ever leave. They had given him way too much of a handhold for him to even consider abandoning his operations here. Kaiza was the leader of that small faction, the spokesperson of the people, and because of that he was on Gato's blacklist immediately. He put up more and more restrictions, hoping for a way to bring Kaiza down. He eventually managed. Kaiza had trespassed into a warehouse owned by Gato to get some supplies to prepare the next meal. He was caught as soon as he entered. The very next day, he had Kaiza tied up to a pole on the main plaza. Gato went on and on of how Kaiza was a criminal that deserved to be killed. Inari was on first line, he was crying as he saw his father get tortured. Yet Kaiza was smiling throughout it all, happy that he was passing away trying to help those close to him. The midget had his thugs cut Kaiza's arms off. Since he was no longer supported by the pole, his head fell to a position where it would be easy to cut his head off. Gato watched as most of the population cried for their friend, their hero. 2 minutes after his arms were cut off, Gato had his thugs decapitate Kaiza. The goddamn midget left the corpse there for a week. Everyone had their spirit shattered by that, not a single inhabitant wasn't broken by the time Kaiza was taken off the plaza. I started the bridge in hopes of getting the spirits of the people back. That's why I can't die until it is finished, to honor the memory of my son. The women were all crying openly, their eyes were turning red already. Kiba was holding his head and shaking it, muttering about how bad could the world get. Shino and Sasuke were as downcast as they could get, their eyes were fixed on the table, and Sasuke could be seen scowling. Naruto was gritting his teeth and griping the table with all his strength. His face was set into an almost pure look of loathing. He raised his head, shadows obscuring everything but his eyes. He looked at the bridge builder directly in the eyes and made a statement that surprised everyone. Don't worry about Gato from now on, by the time we leave the fucker will be dead. His eyes were glowing with barely restrained anger. Everyone shivered at the look, but Naruto paid them no mind. He stood up and went towards the door. He paused after opening the door. Don't wait for me to come back, I'm going to gather information, he told everyone over his shoulder before slamming the door close. Everyone looked bewildered at the door, no one, not even his team had seen that part of Naruto. What just happened? Tizuna's voice broke the silence. I sincerely don't know, Kurenai answered, her own questions roaming her head. He has never acted like that, maybe Kakashi or Yuigao have some answers, but she isn't here and he won't wake up yet. The rest of the night was spent in silence. Hideout 1 hour later, Naruto had followed several similar smells and they led to one of 2 buildings. One at the other end of the island and another hidden in the woods. He was hiding in the foliage that surrounded a small building. He had seen Gato enter, followed by the samurai wanabes. Half an hour after he had entered he saw the midget exit and cradling his hand, the 2 thugs massaging their throats. He narrowed his eyes, whatever was in there was dangerous and hopefully able to change its mind and choose a different allegiance. He carefully made his way inside, using a vent on the roof to infiltrate without making any noise. He used his chakra to stick to the side of a drop on the ventilation system and moved to where he could hear voices. He stopped above the vent that on the roof of what looked like a bedroom. You didn't have to do that, Haku, a gruff voice sounded from below. He strained his ear to hear better. I know, Zabuza-sama, but I couldn't let that scum sully you, Haku, he assumed, answered. Zabuza was alive and he had to report this. I still don't see why we can't just steal his money and go back to Mizuno Kuni, a third voice, this time masculine, but not really as mature as Zabuza's. We may be missing in Hagane, but we still have some honor. He was alarmed now, Zabuza and 2 unknowns to fight in the future, damn. In any case, Zabuza-sama, Haku continued, you should be able for combat in 2 weeks, but knowing you, you'll be moving by Thursday next week. He didn't hear anything after that, he was already turning around. 5 minutes later, he was making his way back to Tizuna's house. He paused momentarily and made a decision. He bit his thumb, made some hand seals and announced, Ninpo. Chisio Bunshin no Jutsu. The wound on his finger started to squirt out of it, pooling a meter in front of him. His chakra started going into the blood, molding it into a human shape. Features started appearing. First skin, then the face, followed by hair and clothes. Naruto barely had time to analyze his creation before falling unconscious. Kurama snorted from within his mind, Gaki should know better than casting that technique without someone watching, he told Kushina. The redhead sighed, at least the clone is still awake, it will keep watch. Kurama only snorted and laid down, growing so the woman could lay down herself. Island training, Azuna's Nami no Kuni 10 a.m. Kakashi had woken up half an hour earlier, still groggy from his exhaustion. Something had bothered him ever since he had awoken, but for the life of him, he couldn't figure it out. He glanced around the room, the kids were still sleeping, but where's Naruto? The boy had been a cause of confusion for him, he was divided on how he should treat the red-headed boy. He knew who the boy was, how could he not? He spent as much time in his sensei's home after the war as he did in the Anbu headquarters, he had been there when Kushina-sama had announced she was pregnant. But every time he looked at him, he was reminded of what he had lost that night, the night of the Kyuubi attack. He had lost whatever remained of his family. Without Minato-sensei and Kushina-sama, he drowned himself in his work, taking more and more missions, until he was ordered by the Hokage to watch over little Naruto. He hadn't seen the kid after his 8th birthday. His life in Anbu still haunted him. The corpses, the kills, every time he had gone after a bounty. It clicked right then. Zabuza wasn't taken by hunter nins, they hadn't destroyed the body. Sasuke. He called to the boy, Sasuke, wake up now. The teen groggily complied, sitting up with a scowl on his face. In any other situation he might have found it funny. Sasuke, wake everyone and tell them to gather here, now. On any other occasion the Uchiha might have discussed, but since his teacher was using a tone that he had rarely seen, he would prefer not to be punished. Forest 9:30. Naruto sat up from where he had fallen the night before. The blood clone had gone hunting sometime during the night and was skinning through whatever it was it had caught. He stood slowly, doing his best to ignore his mother, ranting about how reckless it was to do the Chiseo Bunshin alone, and Kurama laughing in the background. The clone looked up from his job and towards his creator. He was amused really, the boss had made a note to not do another of his class was without someone nearby. What do you have there? The original Naruto asked his clone, who went back to his job. 2 boars and some rabbits, though one of them was white, I think it was grown in a cage. The clone, called CN from now on, answered. Naruto searched his arms for his supply seal and took a bottle of pills from it. When you are done with that, take 2, they should keep you. Naruto searched for words, knocked, when I seal you, so you don't go insane. CN nodded and accepted the bottle. The pills were a creation of his. During an experiment of what happened to sealed object when inside a seal, he had made a shadow clone and sealed it in a scroll before dispelling it when it was still inside it. The clone had gone nuts after 10 minutes. The pills worked by causing the brain to shut down the sensory organs, keeping the drinker in a small coma until the counter pills were administered. It had taken him a full 3 years to develop them right. It took 20 minutes for the clone to finish skinning the game with Naruto's help. CN gulped down the 2 pills and threw the bottle back to the original, who caught them and resealed them. He moved behind CN as he fell back, making sure that his head fell in one of the seals on his arm, one that had less things, and sealed the clone until it was needed. Naruto sealed the meat on a separate scroll and started running towards the house. He had to tell everyone. Bedroom 10 minutes later. The genin were seated around Kakashi, while Kurenai was leaning against the doorframe. The Cyclops looked around, everyone was watching, and Naruto had yet to come back. The reason I called you, he began speaking, is because of something I realized not much earlier. He sighed, what can any of you tell me about hunters? Everyone looked down, trying to remember what was said in the academy. Sakura was the first to answer, they are a special branch of the Anbu that deals with missing ninjas. Emotion from her sensei prompted her to continue, they track fugitives and kill them when they find their target. Kakashi nodded, what about the weapon the one that came for Zabuza used? No one answered, they were senbon, long needles used by Iryonin for acupuncture. He noted that Kurenai's eyes had widened. The reason few people use them for combat is that, well, there are many nerves that can cause death. All are incredibly hard to hit from a distance. He paused for a second and looked at every genin in the eyes. The reason I am telling you this is because. He was interrupted by Naruto, who chose that moment to crash through the window. Zabuza is alive, and he has 2 partners. Silence was what followed his proclamation, so he explained further, yesterday I went scooping for information after I left the house. Kurenai and Kakashi nodded, seeing where this would probably lead. I followed 3 cents into the forest, to a small hideout near a hill. Gato entered, followed by 2 wannabe samurais, and later left holding his hand. I entered the building through the ventilation system and listened in a conversation. Zabuza was alive, a girl and a boy, older than me by a couple of years, were discussing how to proceed. The girl was telling Zabuza that he would probably be at his top by next Tuesday. Kakashi looked proud that a genin could sneak around the enemy lines. I am surprised that they didn't discover you, but considering the number of times you managed to infiltrate and prank the clan compounds and Anbu HQ, it doesn't come as much of a shock, judging by the faces of the brats, it did come as a shock for them. He clapped his hands, alright, acting upon the information Naruto brought, we will start training as soon as Kurenai says. Said woman raised an eyebrow. Kakashi, you won't use this as an excuse to stay in bed and read your smut. She was fixing him with a glare. Damn, ma, of course not, I'll help you as soon as I can stand up, he sighed when her glare was lifted. A shuriken dodged there. Naruto's voice made him look at the other end of the room. Ah no, Kakashi-san, do you have some of this paper? The boy was holding 4 paper squares that didn't look as much, he knew better though. Yes, I always carry a pair with me, I use them as bookmarks. He patted one of his breast pockets. Why? Kurenai answered this, I was about to test my students and what their affinities were, and since I'm in charge of your squad until you can fight, I was going to test them too. The gray-haired man nodded and moved his hand to his pocket, opened his book and took 3 slips of paper. Here you go, he handed them to Naruto. Piece of advice for you, little Miss Hyuga. Don't be disappointed if you get no results, almost no one of your clan does. Kurenai cleared her throat. Alright kids, follow me. Everything we've talked about will be clear when we get to a clearing, wait for me downstairs. The children nodded and left the room, leaving the 2 adults alone. Get well fast Kakashi, we can't afford anything but 100%. The bedridden man nodded. I know, I should be up and about tomorrow, and in fighting condition by Friday. He laid down again. Have them complete the water walking before you start them on elemental affinities, it will help them if they can't complete the first level. The woman nodded and left the room, leaving Kakashi alone. Tsunami would later on walk in on him reading his special book and would use a cooking pan to knock him out again. Clearing half an hour later, Kurenai stood in front of an eager group. Well, some were eager. Sakura was staring at Sasuke and Naruto was spacing off. She cleared her throat to get everyone's attention. Since we know that Zabuza is still alive, we will be training every day until he attacks. The genin nodded, though Naruto was still not paying full attention. There isn't much to teach you right now, so I will show you something every ninja should know. She nodded towards the lake they were standing by, the water walking exercise. At their incredulous faces she demonstrated, walking to the middle of the lake. It is the same and different from the tree walking, because water is in constant change, so the chakra output needed for the platform you need to create is always different. She looked around for questions, only to find herself confused when Naruto nodded at nothing before walking up to her. On the water, Kurenai-sensei, I already know this, do you think you could give me something more advanced? He scratched the back of his head in nervousness. Kurenai looked at him, shock obvious on her face, and judging by the faces the kids were pulling, they were surprised too. How do you know this? I'm pretty sure I haven't teach this to any of you, she told him in disbelief. Naruto looked even more nervous, and his answer was whispered. The seal leaks its chakra into me after purifying it. He pointed at the spiral on his stomach. I wouldn't be surprised if I got more chakra than Jiji. I had to learn to control it before the academy Tebeo. She nodded, the Hokage probably knew this. She made a seal she was sure the boy would recognize, and a clone appeared by her side, leaving her slightly winded. The clone nodded at her creator. Follow me, Naruto-kun. I know something you'll probably find the use for. The clone left, followed by the red head, leaving gaping genin behind. No one noted the angry scowl on the Uchiha's face. 50 meters from lake, Naruto was waiting for his sensei to explain the exercise and then dispel, so he could try and figure the second part of the Rasengan, while his clones worked on the control exercise that was about to be explained. Kurenai looked to the sky in an effort to get the explanation right inside her head, so her student could get after the first time. He was smart, but only so much higher than average, his wit only came out under pressure. The raven-haired woman nodded, the exercise would be perfect for someone like Naruto, a chakra juggernaut. Alright Naruto, what I want you to do is called Chakura no Pointer Plusu, a release of chakra from a single, or a group, of Tenketsu. Naruto tilted his head, that wasn't much useful, was it? Most jonin learn this when, and if, they enter Anbu. The only reason I learned it was because of my specialty on Genjutsu. So it was either hard, unpractical, required higher reserves or both. Kurenai continued as I reading his thoughts. The reason it's so unused is because of its impracticality on the field and its price as time goes on. So he could use it as much as the Kage Bunshin then. I works by sending a beam of chakra through a Tenketsu and them lowering and getting the output of chakra higher. The more practice you have with it, the more Tenketsu you can send beams from. If you manage to get your output and number of Tenketsu high enough, in theory you could stop your momentum or change its direction, giving you a way to dodge mid-air. That was so useful. Why the hell didn't more jonin learn this? Once again anticipating his words she talked before he could. The reason only Anbu learn it is because unless you have a wind affinity, Irionin controller way too much chakra, you can't really use it in the field, and that's not taking into account the burns using chakra in such a way could cause. Naruto's mouth formed an O at that, he had forgotten about chakra burns, the last time he had suffered from one of them was when Kurenai had started them on the weapon balancing, almost 3 months ago. So he began, the only reason you are teaching me this is because the healing factor Kyuubi gives me, plus my huge reserves and wind affinity. The Jinjutsu mistress nodded. Yes, you are probably the only person I can think of that can make use of this. She gave a small smile when the boy grinned at her praise. Start with places you don't have seals on. I don't think they would react well to the influx. She watched as the boy took of his coat and shirt, leaving him with only his pants on. His arms were full of tattoos up the elbow. When she saw his back she gasped. 6 lines were marked on it, running parallel on groups of 3, they looked almost like claws, anima claws she realized, yet another thing to tell the Hokage. Nah, sensei, Naruto's brought her out of her musings, how do I know if I'm doing it right? She smiled, he had noticed she didn't give that bit of info, release as much as you can, and then make the quantity smaller, until you can no longer diminish it. She saw him nod before sitting down. He put his hands on a ram sign and started leaking chakra. The result was unexpected, to say the least, his chest felt as if something was pushing it. He had to put his hand behind him so he didn't hit head, but just as he did the stream cut off, leaving him panting. That, he said, didn't go well. Not only had he underestimated his reserves, there was a blister on his chest, and it was big. Kurenai only smiled. Don't worry, Naruto-kun, she told him, I'm sure you'll figure it out. She was sure, he had managed harder things. The rest of the day he spent burning himself on different places. Dinner time to Suna's house. The group of soaking genin found a red-skinned Naruto helping Tsunami on the kitchen. He had offered to help the woman with the food when he arrived because she didn't have much to prepare, so he had given her some steaks from the boar his clone had caught. His torso was uncovered, showing his tone back to the teens as they entered and making inner Hinata drool. His full concentration was in front of him. He had found a herb that when prepared right would make the rice taste incredible, but would make it uneatable if made wrong. So immersed into his recipe he was that he didn't notice when his teammates and Team 7 entered, he only noticed them after the rice was done cooking, so he was surprised when he saw 5 wet teens inside the living room. The surprise didn't last much though, after only a few seconds of staring he started to laugh like a madman. Sasuke scowled at the laughing redhead, though whatever he was going to say was put in harsher words by a wet and moody Onizuka. What the hell are you laughing at, Reddy? Normally the slight at his hair would have made him angry, but coming from the wet dog boy, nah. It's, he managed to say in between laughs, I didn't realize it would be this funny to see another genin trying to water walk. His composure only stayed for a few seconds before he was reduced to another fit of giggles. The members of Team 7 growled at the purple-eyed boy while he tried to get his laughing under control. Shino too was staring angrily at the boy. His laughs were reminding him of one of his last failures at the exercise. A bug had crossed him and his concentration wavered while he was thinking on how to add said insect to his hive at home. The only dry ones were Kurenai and Hinata, who were only wet around the ankles. They had probably lost control a couple of times before getting it back. Kakashi had descended from the stairs and the sound of laughing, and he started cackling as soon as he saw his team. Naruto and the man stayed like that for a while and only stopped once Tsunami had told them that dinner was ready. Much like the day before, the meal was a silent affair, once again with the only noises being the scraping against plates, but something changed this time. Inari was particularly broody. The boy suddenly put his chopstick down. Why do you even try? His whisper made everyone's attention go to him. His head snapped up. Why do you try to go against Gato? You are just going to die. He pointed to Naruto, and you are going to be the first to go, so carefree. He didn't notice the room got colder. I bet you don't even know what it is to suffer. That made it. Faster than the teens could follow, Naruto had jumped over the table, grabbed Inari, and was now holding him by the shirt against the wall. The room was freezing now, and not a single trace of Kai was present. You think you have it hard? His whisper was loud enough to be heard by everyone, even if not intended. Try dealing through the fucking hell I live in a daily basis. Every adult, save the few smart ones, treat me like the plague. I was alone most of my childhood, shunned, starved. Do you know what the worst part is? Everyone but Inari shook their heads, that when I did found someone who cared for me, they were inside a seal so complex I can't even think about how to break it. The kid's eyes strayed towards the tattoo on his stomach. I have to see them as they seed around, trying to find a way of breaking free without killing someone on the process, and even if they don't show it, I can tell that they hate being like that. Silence fell for some seconds after that, but Naruto ignored it and continued after taking a breath. Do hate Gato? Then use your 2 damn arms and do something about it. Don't just sit in your room and brood. The hand gripping the shirt let it go, making Inari fall. Once again Naruto made his way to the door. I'm going to train, don't wait for me, I won't be back until midday tomorrow, he said without glancing back. Unknowingly he had sparked Inari's memory and he heard a whisper on the back of his mind. If something is truly important to you, even it's heartbreaking, even if it's sorrowful, you keep on trying and trying, even if you lose your life, you keep on protecting it with these 2 arms. Then, even if you die, you leave behind the proof that you are a man forever. He would do a lot of thinking that night. Mentality. Inari's room. Midnight. Young Inari was looking out to the sea. The harsh words Naruto had said had struck deep within him, and he had started to think of his attitude on the past year. He didn't notice when someone entered his room. Boo, he did notice Kakashi sitting down next to him. Nice night, isn't it? The boy didn't answer, making the white-haired Hanan sigh. He didn't mean anything by what he said, you know. No response. What he told you, he probably said to himself countless times. He was ignored by everyone and occasionally beaten. Those were some of the nights he didn't have watch over the then red blonde. I was there when he made his promise to get strong and respected and watched him train to the brink of exhaustion and then some, since he was 8. He sees himself in you, you know. He used to have the same look too back when he was 5. The man stayed silent for some time, getting up 30 minutes later. Think about what both he and I said. It is important to get strong enough to change what you can. The boy stayed gazing at the moon well into the next day, sobbing every once in a while. Middle of the forest, same time. Naruto had realized and awoken the blood clone he had made the day prior, and now the two of them were fighting as if their lives depended on it, or, at least the clone was. He had been owling from the sleep the boss had put him in, thinking that the plan was set into motion, only to block a hand coated in wind chakra and subsequently try and subdue the enraged male before him. He ducked under a slash at his neck. Sometime during the night his crater had started using his bloodline and he had had to deactivate his seals in order to keep up with the rage-driven stabs, slashes and cuts. Naruto overextended one of his slashes, leaving him open for Cien to throw him into a tree and knocking him out. He looked at his body. He had 3 rather deep wounds and was now bleeding from them. With a sigh he grabbed a kunai and cut the prone body of his creator, channeling some of his chakra to absorb the blood and heal himself. That done, he unsealed the pills, took 2, resealed them, took the pills and resealed himself just as he was falling unconscious. Meters away from the place the fight started next morning. If one stumbled by chance into the part of the woods that Naruto was in, they would see collapsed and cut trees, apart from the brutalized herbs and bushes. This was the scene a young, dark-haired, brown-eyed, fair-skinned lady found on her wanderings for medicine. And at the middle of the disaster was a red-headed boy she recognized. It's one of the Konohan in. The lady approached the sleeping boy. It would be so easy. Ridzabuza-sama of some opposition. She was standing over him, her hand inches from his throat, but he looked so peaceful. Her hand went to his shoulder. You should wake up, you could catch a cold, and she shook him. Naruto was not a morning person. Throughout his young life, 15 clocks, 8 alarms and a kitchen timer were all proof to that. Now, where am I going with this? When Naruto was forced to wake up he would normally try and smash whatever was offending, so when the lady shook him, she had to dodge a hand that almost slapped her. Naruto opened his eye when instead of something hard, his hand landed on something round and soft. What he saw made him have a nosebleed. His hand was on the breast of a pretty girl that was both blushing in embarrassment and scowling in anger. He was thrown back towards a tree when a hand met his cheek, courtesy of the girl he had, unintentionally, groped. He groaned as he hit the ground, just one other reason to hate mornings. He sat up. Gomen, miss, it was reflex, he told the angry lady that was now holding her chest, as if expecting him to grope her again. Her eyes narrowed. So you make a habit of groping women when you wake up? Oh yes, righteous female fury. He could see she was readying another slap. He shook his head as fast as he could. He knew from experience how harmful angry women could be. His mother was proof enough. No, it's just that I hate being woken up, and even more when it's a person. His eyes widened at his words. Not that I would harm you, just because you woke me up. I mean, I could never harm someone as beautiful as you. Once again his mouth spoke without his mind thinking. I'll just shut up now, he sighed. The woman giggled. He was different outside of battle. Don't worry about it, just don't do it again, okay? Her voice may have been sweet, but he knew a threat when he heard one, so he nodded. So, what's your name? Haku, Yuki. Haku answered. He showed his fixed grin and extended his hand. Uzumaki Naruto, prankster king, unpredictable ninja extraordinaire and all-round nice guy at your service, Databeo. Haku giggled behind her hand, amused by his introduction, but then she hummed, so you are a ninja then? He nodded at her question. Then you must be strong, no? He chuckled and scratched his neck with a sheepish grin. Well, I may be strong, but I have to train and get even stronger. Why do you need to get stronger? She asked, and then asked a seemingly unrelated question. Do you have anyone precious to you? He thought it over. He had Arukanai, Aim-chan, Tuchi-oji, Hokage-jiji, his Kachan, Kurama, his team, his sensei, Megumi, Konohamaru, Mogi. He nodded. He had a lot of precious people. Yes, I have many, though most of them are back home. Haku smiled wistfully. Then, you will get strong. She chuckled at his confused look and tilted head. I believe that when something or someone precious to you is in danger or simply is there, you will get stronger by trying to protect it or them. I believe that true strength comes from the bonds we form and from our willingness to risk ourselves to keep those bonds alive. Naruto thought over Haku's words. They had merit, especially for him, who wanted to stay alive in order to protect his Kachan and Kurama. Yeah, that is a good way to live by. His smile was small compared to his usual big grin. So Haku, what are you doing here? The girl had started picking some herbs while Naruto was thinking, I'm collecting some plants to make medicine for my sick uncle. Can I help? Naruto asked. Haku answered in affirmative, showing him what plants he should look for. They worked in silence, each in their own thoughts. What they didn't know was that they were thinking about the same thing. Their eventual confrontation was coming. An hour later they heard some rustling from the bushes to the right, startling them. Out of the bushes came out a tall teen, taller than Haku, who was a good head taller than Naruto. His eyes were a curious metallic shade of gray, giving the impression of being molten metal. His hair was a copper brown, once again with a curious metallic tint to it. The newcomer looked at Haku and then at Naruto, an amused and playful spark in his eyes. Oh my, Haku-chan, what would Oji-san said if he saw you with a boy and younger than you? A smile broke out of his face when he saw the bright blushes on their faces, and it grew when Haku spoke. Shut up Hagane-kun. The teen, Hagane, put up a face of mock hurt. Moo, Haku-chan hurts me. He threw himself at her, crocodile tears falling from his eyes. Haku-chan is mean, she shall get a hug of doom. The hug of doom turned out to be quite amusing from an outside perspective. Hagane attached himself to Haku's chest, somehow managing to restrict all her movement and putting his face in between her, and Naruto found himself jealous of the older teen. But of course, he decided that he was quite comfortable where he was when Hagane received kick to the balls. That must have hurt. He got a nod from Kurama. Yeah, no man should experience that. He has my pity. A male shall never hurt another's manhood and should offer island support to whatever brother suffered that fate. He deserved. The man is probably a damned hentai. Kushina of course did not think like that and believed in the eventual eradication of all open perverts. Back in the outside, Hagane had managed to stand, clutching his jewels of course. He let out a pained gasp, followed by various attempts at speaking. After a few moments Hagane got his pain under relative control and managed to speak, though the pain was palpable on his voice. Oh, Oji-san wants us back. Haku-chan. Another gasp, something about his medicine. Haku nodded and turned to Naruto. Goodbye, Naruto-kun, I await our next meeting, and she did, she waited for the day of the attack. Naruto responded to the farewell in kind, letting them get to the edge of the bushes to say one more thing. Oi, Hagane-senpai, Haku-chan. They turned to him. When you attack with Zabuza, make sure you go all out. That said, he left their vision with a whirlwind, signifying a shunshin. Hagane turned serious at once. How did he know that? He asked Haku in a hard voice. Haku was surprised, both at Hagane and at Naruto. I don't know, she answered. He looked clueless all the time I was here. Hagane looked at the spot where Naruto had been standing, then, we may have a big problem. He started walking. Come on Haku-chan, Oji-san is waiting. Just as he had come, the serious Hagane disappeared. Naruto had watched the whole thing from a few trees away. You do realize that you gave away the surprise. Kushina spoke into his mind. He turned around and started hopping towards the bridge. It may not have been the smartest move, I know, but I want to fight with everything I have, not to be underestimated. He though back. Kurama snorted. You should have just take them down when you could, but then again, that is not like you, so nothing to do there. Kushina spoke after a brief silence. You won't be able to spy on them now, and they will go for the kill. I know. With that, the link was cut. Next morning clearing, Naruto was half asleep as he made his way to where he had trained the past 3 days. He had woken up extra early so he could train in something Kurama had thought would work. Oh Gaki, wake up, I'm teaching you your first Yako technique. Naruto straightened, the tiredness leaving him. It's a really basic one, but really useful. The Kitsune. You need to be channeling some of my chakra, just enough to sharpen your senses. Naruto started drawing on Kurama's chakra. It was hard to do it without being annoyed. That's enough, you don't want to wake someone up. Kurama cleared his throat and entered the teaching mode. The Kitsune is the most basic form of fire manipulation used by Kitsune. By channeling some Yaki into our tails, your arms or legs, since you don't have any, or your mouth, a blue fire should come out of the expected point. There is a catch though, you can't use it with normal chakra, since it is more diluted than Yaki. Foxfire is way hotter than any normal Kaiten you could use, so it's also more dangerous. To produce foxfire, you need to imagine the flames, the heat, the form, way you want them to come out. Miss any of those, it will be nothing but useless. If you can create a proper stream of Kitsune before the time your battle comes, I will tell you how to use jutsu without hand seals. The fox looked at Kushina, careful not to let Naruto hear. If he can manage that before the deadline, I'll eat my tail. The woman giggled. Knowing her son, he would somehow, by a half-assed idea, he would manage it. Naruto just created 10 clones so they could work on the control exercise Kurenai-sensei had given him. He may have gotten it to the point he could reduce his chakra output by a dime, but that was not enough. Now, to figure out the Kitsune he had a feeling that something would go wrong if he didn't hurry up. What with Kurama's Yaki flowing through him, even if it was less than a quarter of a tail. Biz felt his hand burn like it never had before and he sighed, it would be a long nighttime to Zuna's house. By Monday, Naruto didn't manage a proper use of the Kitsune. He could manage to make a flame on his hands, but as soon as he tried to extend it or launch it, it would flicker out and only sparks would make it halfway to his target. The night was tense, everyone was thinking about the battle that would come the next day. Naruto had managed to slip into Zabuza's hideout once again, but the only thing he had gotten out that day was the clan's name of the two apprentices. Yuki-Haku and Kinzoku Hagane. Kakashi had told them that they were part of a now extinct bloodline's form Kiri, but he couldn't remember what they were. Everyone lay there, on their beds, waiting for the moment sweet sleep took them. It was a long night. Morning next day, Naruto was the first to wake up. He stayed in his futon for some time, before switching himself with a blood clone, he gave the antidote pills. Cien opened his eyes again, this time, as expected, he had woken up at his own rhythm, waiting for the grogginess to leave. The original had made a plan for today, and his was the most important part of it. The battle of today would save Wave, or they would die trying. As soon as his brain set itself in a normal way, Cien left the house without a single noise. 30 minutes later Tazuna made his way through the door, waking the males that were still sleeping. A glance behind him showed that the girls had woken up already. They had their breakfast, once again a quiet thing, for everyone had the upcoming battle on their minds. Kakashi spoke when the last of the genin finished their food. We don't know what is going to happen when we get out. Everyone looked at him. There are 8 of us, 2 will stay here and protect the house in case it's attacked. We don't need a problem as soon as we manage to get out of the other. The other 6, including Kurenai and I, will go with the bridge builder and protect him. Shall we be attacked on the way, we could outnumber them 2 to 1. If one of them comes here, then the 2 that stayed must dispose of them as soon as possible. Everyone nodded. The stakes were high, incredibly so. Kurenai clapped her hands. I think Hinata and Kiba should stay. If the names of the unknowns are any indication, short-range attacks will be all but useless. The 2 nodded, they didn't like it, Kiba even less, but they understood. All their attacks were short-ranged, and against a weapon user or an ninjutsu user, they were impaired. Kurenai continued, one of us will have to stay with the client when we are attacked. Sakura raised her hand, I'll do it sensei. Kurenai looked at her, if anything, I can stall them long enough for someone to help. Kakashi nodded, indeed, you are mostly a support ninja. Actually he paused and looked at Kurenai, would you mind teaching her some genjutsu? The woman nodded slowly, good, then I just have to pull the string to get her medic training. Naruto looked at the 2 jonin, do we take prisoners or do we fight to the end? He had been wondering that ever since his meeting with Haku and Hagane. Would he have to kill 2 friendly people, whom he had made a bond already? The 2 jonin looked at each other, before Kakashi spoke if you want to, you can capture your opponent, but I don't recommend it. The redhead looked down. He would do everything he could to keep them alive, there was no way he would let 2 friends die. Unnamed bridge. The air was heavy with pressure, the thick mist rolling from the sea reduced the visibility some, leaving only a mile of vision. When they got there, the air tasted of copper. A telltale of blood. Tazuna rushed to the side of a worker that was lying in a pool of blood. Koji, what happened? The old builder asked the prone man. Koji raised his head, a demon came nowhere slaughter run as the last word came from his mouth, the man passed out. They heard a laugh from the opposite side of the bridge. The mist cleared to reveal the demon of the mist and his 2 impostor companions. They saw the demo's grin from under his bandages, looks like the fight will be interesting, his hand settled on the tiger hand seal, Suiton. Mizu Bunshin no Jutsu 10 clones sprung up from poodles around the bridge. Look at them, that brat is shaking, he shouldn't even be in the field, the taller of the masked ones, Hagane, gave a mocking huff. Indeed, the young Uchiha Sasuke was trembling, though a smirk could be seen, I'm shaking, with excitement, the young Uchiha ran the distance separating him from the water clones in seconds, cutting all the clones, and leaving them as they began, a poodle. Zabuza grunted in amusement, looks like you got a rival in the speed department, Haku. Haku nodded, taking out some needles, Senbon, indeed, Zabuza-sama, allow me to take care of him. The girl rushed at Sasuke with her Senbon at the ready, but the raven-haired blocked with a kunai. Shino, help Sasuke, that girl has more chakra than him, Naruto whispered to the shade-wearing boy. As soon he stopped speaking his falcon talons appeared and he launched himself to Hagane, who met him halfway. I'm surprised to see that Naruto noticed that Hagane's arms appeared bladed, but that only means that this is going to be fun. Before him he saw the Hanzoku's hands change into knives, Tetsu no Tishi. Kakashi rushed towards Zabuza, Kurenai staying a few feet behind. You know, said Kakashi as soon as he clashed blades with Zabuza, you might have trained your 2 followers. Haddock ducked under a slash and attempted a stab, but the 2 they're fighting are the best genin of Konoha, He leaned away from the falling Zambatu, the dark one, he is a prodigy. Hooked to everything I gave him in a couple of days, not to say he is an Uchiha. The widening eyes of Zabuza made him chuckle, and the red head, back in the Anbu they call him the prank devil a block, he managed to sneak into the HQ and dye the whole inside and uniform a bright pink, dodge, roll, stab, duck and slash. He managed to prank the Hyugas in the middle of the day, and not even the Byakugan of the clan head saw him until he wanted to jump over a strike at his kneecaps. He is the number one, unpredictable, knucklehead, stealth master of Konoha. The Jonin charged lighting chakra into his kunai, shocking his opponent and allowing him to get a punch at Zabuza's chest. And you know the best part, he continued taunting, he is the last of the Uzumaki. Zabuza drew breath. That was not good, the kid may be a genin, but if he was raised to the standards of the Whirlpool, Hagane would be hard-pressed to beat him. Sasuke vs Haku. A young Uchiha was currently trying to push his opponent to the ground, but the girl was resisting and even sending him back some. You are strong, I'll give you that, Haku spoke from behind the mask, but I have two advantages that you lack. The onyx-eyed boy snarled, what would that be? He mocked, trying to bait the masked girl into recklessness. One would be the fact that we are standing near water. A scoff met that statement. The second would be that both your hands are occupied. Well, one of mine is free. She lifted her left hand and started moving through seals. How on-handed seals should be impossible, thought the last Uchiha, but it wasn't, and the proof was right in front of him. Haku stopped her hand, Hijutsu. Sentatsu Susho. 1,000 needles raised themselves from the water around them. Sasuke could feel the smugness coming from his opponent as she jumped out of the way. But he would not be beaten so easily and managed to escape the dome with only a few scratches to his clothing. He felt the mist get heavier. You see this? Haku spoke from behind him. You cannot win this. He looked back but saw nothing. Never let your guard down. He barely managed to block the senbon that came from his right. Come out and face me, you coward, he snarled at his rival, and to his surprise, she did. She launched another volley of needles at him and he blocked them all but one that lodged itself on his rib, making him gasp in pain, but that didn't deter him. He flipped through hand seals as he dodged another wave of senbon, Kaiten. Kakaku no Jutsu, a fireball thrice his size flew from his mouth and headed towards the girl, who managed to leave the target zone unscathed. It would be a long fight. Haku reached the same conclusion. I would like you to give up now, she told Sasuke, who just scoffed. Very well, please, forgive me for what I'm about to do. Her hands blurred. Hyuten. Makyo Hyasho. After a quick her seal sequence was done. The dome of ice sprung up around them and Sasuke was surprised when Haku stepped into it. Naruto vs Hagane. You know, Hagane spoke in between the clashes the weapons were making. I never expected you to be this much of a threat when I met you a week ago. Naruto parried a stab and attempted on of his own, but that too was parried, leaving them in another deadlock. Yeah, Naruto smirked. You must never underestimate, and Uzumaki. His foot came up in a kick aimed at Hagane's kidney. It might just be the last thing you do. Hagane launched himself to the left as a clone did a drop kick where he was standing. He clapped. Nice, you managed to create a clone without me noticing. The two Narutos came at him, attacking in a perfect tandem. When the original kicked high, the clone would kick low, then the two would stab at the same time in different speeds, leaving him to predict who would strike first. Hagane stopped a kick aimed at his throat and stabbed the offending limb, causing the clone to be dispelled. He jumped back and smirked at the redhead. Well, you shouldn't underestimate me either. He stabbed the air in front him. Tetsuzum. Kishin. His hands changed into spears, which launched lots of spearheads at the redhead, who twisted around them, managing to evade most, but still receiving some scratches. Naruto's hands blurred into motion before he called a jutsu of his own Suiton. Mizu no Giant Mishiki Otoru. From the heavy mist formed spears that launched themselves to the iron ones Hagane had thrown. When the clash of spears ended, the two rushed towards the other, clashing blades once again. Hagane had not reverted to the short-bladed hands and instead stayed with his arms in the form of spears, giving him range advantage. On the other hand, Naruto was more nimble and managed to avoid every swing and pounce, but his Kage no Byuki only served on close quarters, something he didn't have the chance of getting. He backflipped out of Hagane's range. Futon. Detopa, he shouted as soon as he stopped, making the older teen stumble as the air-based attack smashed into him. Naruto used the time it took Hagane to make an air attack, intent on pierce the older teen with his claws. Yet Hagane recovered faster than he thought he would, and his eyes widened as he saw that the spears were pointed directly at his chest. Izuna's house. Hinata and Kiba, with Akamaru, were in the guy's room playing with a deck of cards. Naruto had left them. Why he had one they would never know. So, Kiba's voice made Hinata look up from her cards. Naruto is on his way to become a seal master. I don't believe you, Akamaru barked in agreement. Well, when I asked him, he told me that he could read the stokes of the seal. She frowned at her cards, a pair of 2s and a third of 4s. He told sensei that seals just came to him. Kiba was about to retort when a scream was heard from downstairs. They looked at each other before rushing out the door. Tsunami was cleaning the kitchen when a knock on the door stole her attention. She walked toward the front entrance with calmness that left her as soon as she opened the door. "Heh, what a beauty," a tanned, scared man leered at her and made to grab her. She did the only thing that came to mind, she screamed. Almost immediately Inari was in the receiver, looking shocked at the thugs holding his mother. "Hey, Waraji, can I cut the brat?" The taller of the two asked the blue-clad one, who nodded. Tsunami spoke without thinking, "No." Two annoyed gazes fell on her. "If you touch him I'll bite my tongue and kill myself." The short man scoffed, "You're lucky, Gaki, your mother saved you." He started dragging Tsunami out the door. Inari heard Naruto's voice, along with Kaisa's, in his head, "Use your two damn hands and change it." He grabbed a knife from the sink and rushed to the thugs, wanting to save his mother. Only to be swatted aside by an angry samurai. "Wanted, you asked for it, brat," the man made to skewer Inari with his blade. The boy was lucky however, because as soon as the katana was halfway out of its sheath, a spinning object collided into the bandit, throwing him, bleeding, into the water. The short thug watched surprised as his partner fell, but a strike to his back made him collapse. The last thing he saw before his eyes lost their life was a cream-colored jacket. Inari and Tsunami watched as the two ninja that stayed behind made quick work of the bandits, as if they were nothing. They were amazed at how fast they had disposed of the thugs. Hiba watched as the eyes of the 8-year-old changed from sulking to steely. Just before he ran towards the village, Ma made Inari. Tsunami cried as she saw her son leave, but stopped when the wild boy put his arm on her shoulder. "Anada," he called, "stay with her, I'll follow Inari." He didn't give the girl a chance to answer because he has started moving and was outright running when he finished. But CN made his way through the forest, his mission, taking over Gato's manor house. He would admit that it made an impressive sight. 4 stories of Gothic architecture, marble pillars adorned the porch, high windows and oak doors. He made a quick overview. 3 windows were open in the third, fourth, using the American terms, floor, probably bedrooms. There was a side door ajar, probably leading to the laundry. A vent was visible from the roof. 5 entrances apart from the front door, 1 of them probably defended, 3 probably occupied. His attention went to the massive oak doors as they opened, and out came Gato with an entourage of bandits, and the midget was talking, "As soon as half of them are dead, we move to the top of the bridge and kill the rest." Everything got easier for him and harder for the original. A shadow clone formed and popped as soon as Gato disappeared from sight. He moved stealthily. If there were any guards, they weren't very good. He jumped and entered the house through one of the open windows. A bedroom. The inside was just as the outside, expensive, an unnecessary show of money. Velour furniture and silk curtains, crafted wood, rare paintings. He moved through the manor, checking every room for something that might be useful. It was on the west wing of the second floor that he found what he was looking for. Gato's study, the place he kept all documents in. The desk, mahogany, had tons of paperwork, piles almost a meter tall, and drawers filled to the brim with documents, and safes with money. He made many cage bunchen and had them sort through everything. They would throw away useless papers while keeping bank statements and property deeds. It would certainly help if he had a couple of safe houses outside the village, should he ever go rouge. What troubled him was that there were things missing. Tizuna had told them that Gato was a criminal overlord, and the only thing that he had documents of was of drug dealings on different countries. He let it slide though, right now he had more pressing matters. The furniture would look good on his building. Naruto versus Hagane. He couldn't die, not like that, not when he was 12, not before he got his Kachan out of the seal. He knew that something on his repertoire that could help him survive. When the output is enough, the Chikurin open to Arisu can change, and maybe even stop momentum completely. That's it, he could do that. His whole mind into this chest, his chakra output skyrocketed and his body was thrown back, startling the older teen. He landed on his butt and he couldn't help it, he laughed, the laugh of a man that had found salvation after months on the wild. It worked, his half-assed, not battle-tested, totally unorthodox method of dodging worked. He did it again to get out of the way of a falling spear. How the hell did you do that? Hagane screamed. He had come so close at winning his battle only for victory to be thrown, quite literally, out of his grasp. He was, understandably so, quite pissed. Naruto grinned after he got back to his feet. That, my friend, would be telling. He moved into his stance, and I'm not the kind to do that. He rushed at Hagane. The older teen had changed his whole forearm to a sword. The two clashed blades, swords versus claws. Naruto grinned again, his palms opened, and Hagane felt himself being pushed back by whatever it was the redhead had done. Hagane stopped a kick to his side, once again unprepared for the push that came after it. Naruto disengaged and jumped back to make a quick status check. His reserves were down by a quarter by keeping the Kage no Buki active and the use of the Chikurin open to Arisu. A clone had dispelled and informed him that Gato would come soon, so the battle had to end. His hands blurred, making the hand seals for his more devastating water release technique he knew. He moved, twisted and dodged around the slashes Hagane was throwing at him. The chain was long and the jutsu costly, but it would damage Hagane enough to leave him out, Uzumaki Hijutsu. Yuzu no Kami. The mist around him condensed into arms that started spinning around him. The Yuzu no Kami, or Whirlpool Devastation, was one of the few high tier his mother had taught him. It needed lots of water and even more chakra to maintain. It used surrounding water in any form and made tentacles that started spinning so fast that they joined in one big whirlpool that whipped anything in the area around the caster. But the amount of chakra he put into the technique, Hagane was littered with cuts and bruises by the time it ended, but he would live. He laid the metal user on the ground as he fell, unable to continue fighting on his own. Naruto himself felt that less than half of his reserves were still usable. Hagane coughed and looked at Naruto. "Why don't you finish it?" he asked. "Why don't you kill me now that I'm defenseless?" Naruto smiled tiredly because I doubt that Haku-chan would like it. His talons disappeared. "Besides, I could have done it on the forest a week ago, when your guard was down." He chuckled. "I'm just not that kind of person." He stood up and created a shadow clone. "Now, I got to see if my teammates need help. Hagane watched as the redhead walked towards an ice dome that had formed some time during the battle. "You are a weird person, Uzumaki Naruto," he told the clone, who chuckled sheepishly. "But Shino." Naruto walked up to the shade-wearing boy. They were standing outside a dome of what looked like mirrors, and Sasuke was playing a porcupine inside. "What's going on? Why aren't you there?" The silent boy buzzed in answer. "My insects can't stand the cold, only some of them are still out and sucking chakra of the technique, but they are incredibly weak." Naruto hummed in thought before doing what he did best, annoy people. Haku-chan. He was pretty sure Shino would hit him for shouting close to him. He walked so he was standing with his back to Sasuke. "I don't suppose you can let this poor pincushion leave?" he asked while pointing at Sasuke, who scowled at being reminded of his predicament. "No, come on, he can't die yet." "Well, how about this?" He grabbed a shell-shocked Uchiha and threw him out before Haku could react. The girl stared at the current scene. She knew Naruto could be eccentric, but this was too much. She finally lost it when he got a bottle out of nowhere and started drinking out of it. She launched an attack to the redhead, who moved out of the way. From the corner of her eyes she saw that the dark-haired boy from before was trying to melt her mirrors from the outside, and he was partially succeeding. The ice user's attention went back to Naruto as the boy sent blades of wind at her. She was shocked when she saw his eyes were now a glaring red. A flame appeared on Naruto's hand, and the 12-year-old ran to one of Haku's crystals and started hitting the ice with his fire-covered hands. Coincidentally, he and Sasuke were hitting the same mirror with their attacks, though Naruto's side was melting faster. Their attack ceased when the screeching of 1,000 birds reached their ears, and Naruto had to run after Haku when she ran to the source of the sound with a cry of Zabuza-sama, catching her just as Kakashi's attack connected with Zabuza's shoulder. Kakashi vs Zabuza. Kurenai could only hear the occasional sound of metal against metal and see the sparks when the massive Kubikuribachu clashed with the kunai. Around the beginning of the fight, Zabuza had thickened the mist, and the visibility was only of a few meters, keeping her from being able to target Zabuza in one of her illusions. She had retreated and was now standing beside a shaking Sakura and a sweating Tazuna, the latter straining himself so he could hear what was going on. Kakashi was starting to feel tired of the fighting. With a mist as thick as it was, his Sharingan was all but useless, and so was his normal eye. To top that, since the fog was saturated with chakra, using his nose would be impossible unless he called his summons. His ears twitched, and he dodged a swipe from Zabuza, receiving a gash on his side from being only a bit too slow. The chuckle sounded from everywhere around him. "What's the matter, Kakashi? Am I too much for you to handle?" He leaned out of the way on a slash meant for his front. He took a scroll from one of his pockets. Not really. His carefree manner seemed to enrage Zabuza as he dodged a particularly viscous strike. "I just needed something I could track you with." "What?" Was that despair in Zabuza's tone? The smirk could be seen from Kakashi's mask. "Yeah, you see, I let you cut me some time back." He opened the scroll and rubbed some blood from his side in it, so my ninja could use it. He threw the scroll and started going through hand sings, clapping his hand over the scroll, as in hit the ground. Kuchius. Doten. Suga no Jutsu. 4 dogs burst from the ground under Zabuza, biting him on different places and leaving him vulnerable. Lightning sparked in Kakashi's right hand before it engulfed it completely. Zabuza was disturbed by what he felt. "It's so concentrated it's visible. That shouldn't be possible." Kakashi ran at Zabuza with a shout of Rikiri, intent on impaling the missing nin through the chest. But the sound of clapping and a loud shout made his concentration slip, so his hand went through Zabuza's right shoulder, leaving both his arms useless. The mist cleared until the whole bridge was visible, and the dogs holding Zabuza in place disappeared with a puff of smoke. Standing there, with an army of thugs and mercenaries behind him was the bane of Nami. Gato. The man was smiling a sick twisted smile, one that talked about a battle won. "Looks like the demon couldn't handle some brats." The midget scoffed. "Doesn't matter, my friend's over here." He motioned to the bandits behind him. "We'll deal with whatever you left." The army of men cheered. Zabuza forced his bandages out of his face and snarled at the midget. He looked at the boy sitting over Haku. "Oi, Uzumaki, do you have anything I could use on those seals of yours?" The kid nodded, already knowing where it would lead. Naruto unsealed a tanto he had bought in case he wasn't able to call the Falcon Talons. He wasn't very good with it, but it was perfect for what Zabuza was going to do. A clone took the blade to Zabuza, who put it in his mouth and charged at the giant force. Beto ran back as soon as he saw the swordsman charge, ordering the mercenaries to attack the raging man. Zabuza slammed blade first into one of the bandits, tearing the man apart. He ran to the back of the group, disemboweling everyone who stood on his way to his target. Some thugs would manage to land some of their attacks, resulting on Zabuza bleeding a lot from his back, but it did nothing to him. He was on the killing zone, the same as when he had killed all those kids back in the bloody mist. He had a target and nothing would get between him and Geto, not even death. A mirage of an Oni formed behind him, scaring everyone senseless and freezing Geto where he stood. The Kurigakure no Kijin paid no mind to them at all, not to the cries of agony, not to the whimpers of fear. The area around him had become mute and nothing but the screams of Geto would bring sound back to him. Zabuza cut the head of the criminal as he begged for mercy, resulting in a shower of blood that was oddly satisfying. He made his way back to his students. Hagane was being helped up by a clone, while Haku was restrained by the original Naruto. He weakly made a motion to Hagane to come as he himself made way to the crying Yuki. He collapsed to the floor. He had enough energy left to say some words to his legacy. "Listen, you two here," asped out. "I know I didn't tell you, but both of you are important to me." Haku gasped. Zabuza looked at her. "You were more than tools to me after some years you spent with me, and I don't want you to follow me soon." He rolled to his side and looked at Hagane in the eye. "You better keep her safe. I don't care how you go with it, as long as I don't meet either of you in hell." He fell back to his stomach. "You could follow Uzumaki. I don't care, just stay safe." Musuko with that, his eyes dropped, and Zabuza Mamachi, the Kurigakure no Kijin, wielder of Kubikirabucho, left the world of the living. The shadow clone sat Hagane close to Haku and dispelled. The original went to stand by his sensei and squad leader, his talons back into place. Sasuke, Shino and Sakura joined them, the latter two staying a few paces behind. The mercenaries snapped out of their shock at seeing some punk stand in front of them. They charged as a group, the remaining bandits raising their weapons and shouting to the top of their lungs. Naruto looked at the incoming wave and then at Kakashi. "Do you think you can do a couple dozen clones?" As he said this, his hands moved into his trademark seal. Haddock nodded. "They would have to be water clones. Yes, I think I can give some help." 20 clones sprung from nearby poodles, and about 100 appeared behind them. The army stood still at the appearance of more ninja, but charged again. The bolt struck the leader of the formation on the chest. The last thing he saw was that the villagers had armed themselves. Tiba and Inari were standing proud in front of the crowd, Akamaru in his human form. This was enough and the bandits turned around and ran. The Naruto and Kakashi clones attacked the fleeing army, leaving only a handful dozens to get to the boat. The originals, their squad and their prisoners Tagalongs retreated to the villagers, receiving congratulations, thanks and all-around appreciation. Cien appeared from the crowd and gave Tazuna a folder. The man gasped as he saw what was inside. Every single deed on the land and the money Geto stole up to the last cent. The clone, its job done, jumped to the water and dispelled, causing Naruto a headache. It would later be agreed that the Hokage would decide what to do with the willing hostages. Later that week, Sasuke would discover that his Sharingan had awakened sometime during his fight with Haku. Hagane and Haku had a small funeral for Zabuza, his sword serving as headstone. The shinobi were all present. Naruto told his sensei that he would be going to Yuzu the day after the funeral and that he would be back by the